Hello, this is Will Faber from Art to Ride, and welcome to our new home, the San Jose Equestrian Center in Vista, California. We've just moved. The place where we were, we had a great deal of trouble with the footing. Owners kept promising us to fix it and never did. So we had a lot of problem with our horses' feet, and we ultimately had to just stop training our horses for a while we waited to move to our new facility. So basically what we're doing here is starting from the very beginning, if you will. Our horses all had a slow last couple of, really about 4 months, where we had to just slow down with them all as we were experiencing so many feet problems from the ground being too hard. What you have to realize about hard ground, if you live someplace like California where it hardly ever rains, the ground is extremely hard, like rock. Like sometimes it is in some places. We used to experience that in Kentucky. For instance, in the first of the year, the ground would harden up when summer would come, and it would go from being very, very soft to being hard as a rock. And we always had to be very careful with the horses' feet during that changeover period, or they would get sore. And that's kind of a little bit what happened to us with our horses here, as we had a very dry winter in California last year. Really didn't get any rain down here. The rings became extremely hard. And therefore, not only is the top part hard, but you have to realize that it's deep into the ground where we need softness. The ring that you're seeing here is actually a brand new ring. It's probably about 6 or 8 feet thick in grades of different compaction that allow the horse to have much more spring deep down into the ground, much as race tracks are built. They go deep into the ground so the concussion of the horse's feet at a gallop have some cushion. Even when you walk on this arena, you feel a great deal of cushion underneath you, like you can almost feel the spring in the ground. So once again, we're very happy with that and happy to be at our new facility. We hope you all will come and visit us soon. So what we're doing with all of our horses, they all had about a 3 or 4 month very slow period while we waited for the new place and to get ready for us to be here, and just had to basically stop a lot of what we were doing and just keep the horses as best we could till we could get off of that hard ground. So this is our first week in our new facility, and I'm basically starting with horses that basically are, have lost a lot of condition, a lot of muscle due to the fact that we could not work them the way they normally could. So I'm starting back at the very beginning. So this is literally our first day of training here. This will follow our first week here as I take you through the various horses that we're training, and show you what we're doing with each one to bring them back and the level of their training, and hopefully show you some finer points in all of this so you can see it happening in front of you and study what we're looking for. So this is Amber's horse, who I've just taken over. He's just come to me, literally just came here the day before maybe, that I'm working him here. So I'm starting him out as I often do in the stretch, just to find out where he's at, be sure he's stretching into the contact, and starting back at the very, very beginning. All of you have to remember that, if your horse has been not in full work or not in work at all for a couple of months, you've lost a great deal of muscle. We start to lose muscle mass after only 2 weeks of inactivity. So after 3 or 4 months of very light work, our horses, as this one has lost a great deal of top line. So you have to back up. Remember that collection, for instance, as this horse was capable of doing, is dependent on developing that strength. So if you lose a lot of that strength, you lose the ability to collect. So I'm having to back up and work this horse, getting him long, stretching over his back again, and build up those muscles that will allow him to come back into collection. I'm going to show you how I do that over the next few days, as well as with the new horses. You're going to meet some new horses today that you haven't met before. With our new facility, we now have room to bring in a lot more horses, which we are doing, and you'll see a lot of new horses here over the next couple of months coming in that are already booked to come into the new facility. So that's going to be a lot of fun and hopefully very educational for you all to see all that. So I'm starting back exactly where I show you all how to start, just back in the long and low, stretching him deep over his back and getting that walk to become active and stretch into the contact. Once again. So we're very happy to be here at our new place. I hope you all enjoy the videos that we're going to be able to do here. The footing here is wonderful, though it's a little dry. You can see in these first couple of days we're still experimenting with how much water we need to get on this. But it's not just that. This is actually a mix of sand and Nike product in this ring. So even if it's dry, it feels quite good. And it has the perfect depth. In most of it, it's pretty much about 2.5 inches over the top of the base there. And once again, this ring is probably about 6 foot deep of various grades of impaction that give you some real bounce to the stride, and of course is what keeps your horse's feet sound. Got to remember that in Art to Ride, we're working horses in their maximum gaits. We're trying to really open them up and get them free. So if you are working on a hard footing or a footing that has a lot of holes in it, things like this, as the footing did where we were, you can run into a lot of difficulties. So it's very important, if horses are going to trust us to open their gaits, then they need to trust that they're going to be on footing that's going to allow that to happen. So I did a little work in hand with him. Now this is the first day on him. You'll notice that I have a double bridle on this horse today. And the reason I do that is by the time this horse came to us, unfortunately, I saw this horse as a 3-year-old and tried to buy him, but the people didn't want to sell him then. And then a year and a half or so later, they called me up wanting to sell him, and unfortunately, they had done a very bad job of the training. And he was only under saddle 2 weeks when I first saw him at a clinic, and I rode him, and he was just phenomenally nice. But a year and a half later, they taught him to bolt, and things like trying to lunge him, he would just bolt off, and same thing if you tried to canter him, he would just bolt off with you. So this is his first day. He literally has only just arrived here at the stable here just an hour or so before I'm doing this. So I'm just being a little careful there, as I always do to be sure. But once again, starting out in that walk and just looking for that big stretch, just to get him stretched out and get the tension. While he doesn't look very tense in these photographs here, if you felt him, you would feel that he actually is quite tense more than normal. So I'm just looking for that big stretch. Now you'll notice also I'm riding with quite short stirrups here in the beginning. All my horses are just coming back. So I'm riding them with little shorter stirrups than I would normally do, just to be able to get off their backs when I need to, do some canter in a 2-point position, this sort of thing, so I can get off their backs in the beginning of bringing them back. So I was very happy with the work in hand. He stretched nicely at the trot, which is what I'm always looking for to start with. And he's swinging pretty nicely here and beginning to get over his back. So for his first day back at work, that's very good and pretty much exactly what I'm looking for. But you can still see here his head and neck is coming up and down. There's not a lot of flexion in his hocks. Pay attention to the hocks and the back end of the horse as we work through all these various horses. But you can see there he starts to swing a little better and a little more actively. Right there he begins to push off the ground a little bit. And that's all I'm looking for in this first day of working him, is just to get him soft and over his back, get him listening to me. Once again, you can see a little how dry the sand is there. We don't have quite the footing exactly where I want it yet in terms of the moisture in it, but you can still see that it has a nice bounce in it. We'll get back the other day weight. Once again, this is all I'm looking for. Notice he's stretching nicely over the top line, coming through, starting to lift up just a little bit. And I just let him come back to a walk there. The same thing in the next direction. First day, I'm just looking for him to open up, stretch over his back. Remember, we can't bring a horse into collection every day. Even if this horse were capable of it today, we still don't keep them locked in a collected frame, because collection is not just shortening a horse into some tightened frame where they lift their knees off the ground. They've got to be soft and supple over their backs in order for collection to happen. Real collection is that degree to which the horse's hind legs thrust up into the back and lift the front end off the ground. That's what creates lift and creates real collection. So collection is not a trick or something different. It's just a higher level of the same thing. So as the horse becomes better and better, develops more and more strength, it's able to push and thrust up into its back and lift the front end off the ground. That's what real collection is. And of course, I'm not looking at all for any of that today. I'm looking for him just to stretch out and relax and begin to connect over his top line. So you can still say he's a little wobbly from side to side, not quite directly into that contact the way I'd like him to be, but it's getting pretty good and pretty loose right there. I do a little canter. Now notice once again, that's why I have my stirrups shortened, because I don't want to sit on his back at this point. I haven't cantered this horse in a while. So I just want to be up in a 2-point position, and basically today is a day of just testing him out. Let's see how he goes on the new footing, how he's responding to the training, and how much muscularity that I have there that I can work with. So I stay up off his back in a 2-point position and just let him roll along here in a nice big canter. It's a little bit of a flat canter, but he's coming through and working over his back here. It's not terrible. So I begin to add a little seat into the saddle there a little bit, but not a lot. So I'm looking for him to just activate that back and swing along in a nice big canter. And he does that quite nicely here today. So coming back to the trot after the canter there, we see that he's got a little more activity there. Even wants to lengthen here a little bit, but still doesn't have as much lift as I would like him to have. There's a lot of activity there, and it's fairly well connected right there. You can see the front and back end are swinging pretty well together, but there's not a thrust off the ground. So here I try a little bit of sitting trot, but it feels too tense to me. He's not really coming up and supporting me, so I just go right back to the rising trot because I know that if I sit any longer on there, it's just going to get harder and may make his back sore. So if he doesn't come up to meet me and carry me softly, I'm just going to go back to the rising trot. So here I begin to bring him up, and you can see he tries to curl just a little bit. He's a little bit tense here still. And instead of lifting, now that's not a bad little lengthening of stride, you might say, but it's still a little too quick and there's not enough lift up into the back. So today's a day, so after that, of course, I come right back to the stretch, let him come back down again, and just stretch all the way out. Now, what you're going to see right here is the moment that I'm looking for. So I'm looking for the moment that he connects over his back, not just stretches down. And this is the important thing for all of you to find, that stretching down facilitates getting the horse's back through, but we still have to ask the back to come up, and that's a skill that the rider has with their legs and their balance. So watch what happens right here as he slows down and all of a sudden he begins to lift right there. Now see all of a sudden how the front end becomes lighter, the gait slows down, and we see him swing. Now watch that again. Right here it slows down, right there, and watch it start to lift out. Notice the neck is carried nicely out in front of him. Watch that again. Right there is what I'm looking for. So that's the moment that I stopped on that day. So now we're moving on to Bailador. Once again, you'll see with him that I have him in a double bridle for this first day of work, and I'm looking for him just to stretch out. He was also a horse that used to spook literally every stride as you went around and would often bolt with you and things like this. So just to be sure that doesn't happen again, because whenever horses have tendencies, we want to be sure that we make adjustments in what we do to prepare for that. Like with him, I rode him in a double bridle for a long time, just because you never knew when he was going to decide to spook at something and bolt with you. So that's why I do this the first day here, is just to be sure that we don't have any incidents where he gets away with that. Because a horse that was as confirmed a spooker as this one was, which was, I call this horse the second most difficult horse I've ever trained, is he was very difficult in that he's just spooked continuously. Every other stride, any little sound, his own, if he were going around the arena, for instance, and his feet kicked a little sand against the rails or whatever, he would have a complete conniption and melt down on you and try to bolt with you. So I just put a double bridle on him the first day just to be sure that that I don't have any of those incidents. He doesn't get away with anything, because of course, anytime a horse gets away with anything, even if it's by accident, they may try to do it again if they realize that it has an effect that they want. Now, he doesn't do that much anymore, as you can see here, and I really have no problem at all. So what you'll see is the following days, I just go back. But we can still see with his walk here, it's a little bit stiff. He became, once again, because of the footing where we were, he became sore in all 4 feet at one point. So we've been working very hard to get him back happy on his feet again. And that's pretty much on its way to being taken care of. And he's stretching out nicely here in the walk, which for him, you notice he's not overreacting to a lot of things here. He's wanting to look at the new surroundings, but he's not freaking out and flinching or bolting or jumping sideways, which was his favorite thing to do in the past. But we see that he's staying quite calm about it all, and that's really what I'm looking for with him this particular day, is just come out, get a nice swinging walk. Now take a look at the back behind the saddle. You can see this horse had one of the worst backs I've ever experienced, and it's taken me years. I call him, as I said, the second most difficult horse I've ever trained. More because of his difficulties than anything else, his physical difficulties, which caused him a great deal of problems. If you go back and look at the old original videos of him, you will see that he had holes in his back. He was quite sway back, his completely ewe-necked. So we can see that ewe-neckness is all gone. And for his first day back here in work, this is really quite good. He's swinging quite actively over his back and staying very relaxed. But what you'll watch is, the thing with him is to keep watching that area behind the saddle there to see how things change. So notice here, even in the trot, that's come up a little bit. The thrust has helped that a little bit. It begins to flatten that out a little bit. But I try to bring him up here a little bit, and it just gets a little tight. He gets a little tighter in his neck, tells me his back isn't quite ready to come up to where I want it to be without him overbending, as you see. This horse was completely broken over in the neck and would just basically pin his chin to his chest with you as you rode him. So I'm always working with that overflexion in his neck. So notice as soon as he tries to overflex, I let him right back out. But here he has a nice big swinging trot, and that's looking quite good there and getting the neck out in front of him, but still not as much thrust as I would like to see. So I come back to the canter. When I first got this horse, for the first couple of years, if I tried to canter him at all, he would immediately be sore in his back for a couple of weeks afterwards. So it took me years to get to the point where I could canter this horse without making him sore in his back. But now you can see his canter is actually pretty nice, pretty relaxed. Gets a little tight in the head and neck, more so than I like, but he stays pretty round over it and doesn't just hollow. And that was the issue. As soon as you tried to canter this horse, he would just completely hollow his back, throw his head straight in the air, and he would make his own back worse than it was. But here we see a pretty good swinging trot here. I still want his nose out a little more. He still wants, so it tells me he's not really exactly where I want him to go yet, because he's still wanting to curl back. And of course, that's always the difficulty with these horses that have been broken the neck. But I'm pretty happy with the nice relaxed swing he's giving me here in this first day. Gets better here. We see a little more lift in it. But once again, in these first days with him, I'm just looking for him to relax, get soft over his back again, and once again begin to trust the footing. It's very difficult when we're on hard footing, as I said, or uneven footing. We're trying to work our horses in optimal gaits, big open gaits that will eventually lead to collection. But remember, collection is not shortening horses down. That's the biggest confusion people have today, is they think collection is shortening a horse. In other words, trying to pull it together from both ends, if you will. The horse has to come together from the back end and then begin to lift, and that lift begins to get to the point where it lifts the front end so much that we could then say that it's collected. But once again, it's not a different thing. It's just a higher level of the same thing. And once again, it's not a trick. So if you have a horse that loses muscular conditioning, it's going to lose some degree of collection to the degree of muscle that it's lost. But that was pretty nice with him. His swing, he stayed very relaxed throughout. So now I'm going to start the piaffe with him. So watch what happens here. Now watch how his back has now flattened out because of the piaffe, which is why I worked the piaffe on this horse. He was so hollow that this gives me a chance to bring his back end up underneath him and begin to ask him to sit down, as you see him doing right there. He begins to lower the hocks a little bit, and look how relaxed he stays in all of this. It really brings, I try to let the neck come a little bit forward here. And you can see he starts to spook at something coming by the rail. There's another horse passing by he wants to pay attention to. But this is staying nice and relaxed. The piaffe should not be something that's tense and like a horse stomping its feet. You want the horse to stay soft and lift itself up. Now watch how his hocks begin to lower right there. That's what I'm looking for. Spooks a little bit with somebody coming by on the rail on the other side, tries to lose his attention. But I just bring it right back on me again. Now he begins to push off the ground a little more. But there's what I'm looking for, just to bring that neck. So in this particular day, I'm looking for him to stretch a little bit forward in the piaffe, as you've seen me do before. But look how nice and even the hocks start to move. That's what I'm looking for right there. Those last couple of moments were exactly what all of that was for. So happy with that, and he's done for the day. Now we're starting off with Perhaps. You all remember Perhaps. Perhaps was Karen's competition horse. She showed successfully through Intermediate 1, has been trained through Grand Prix. And Karen won her silver medal on this horse, and she competed quite successfully against horses of a much higher caliber, if you will, in terms of the horse flesh, and was able to come out and compete and do very well for herself in a world where mostly people want to look at million-dollar horses these days. So Karen's riding her today for the first time, just to give her a work back before Barb begins riding her in the new property. Perhaps is a perfect example of what this work can do. Perhaps is now 21 years old. We got her at 5 years old. She was probably one of the most insane horses I've ever seen in my life, and you see how completely relaxed she is now. It took quite a few years to settle her down, but once she did, she's become one of the most reliable schoolmasters that you could possibly imagine. So at the height of her career, we retired her, and Barb has her, and she's doing perfectly well. At 21 years old, she's ridden every day. She's sound. She doesn't get any injections or any of these kind of things. She just lives on a normal diet and does very well. Remember, this horse is only about 15-2 hands, folks. She's a bit straight behind, so once again, you see how important it is to do this work. If you have one of these million-dollar movers that has these hocks that move no matter what, that's what's fooled a lot of people. This is not one of those kind of horses, and most of you don't have those kind of horses. So people are getting away with a lot today by virtue of the quality of the horses that they have. And it's fooled many people because they think if the hocks are moving, the horse is over their backs. But the way we bred horses today, that's not true at all. So Karen's just taking some time just to stretch her out today, a little lateral work, just like with all the rest of them. We're looking to get them on this good footing. This is her first day. And just stretch out a little bit. You can see how she still even has at this day, has that little tendency to want to curl behind the bridle a little bit. But look how beautifully she begins to swing. Now right there, to see it begin to take off right there, she gets a little more flexion, and the hock starts to get a little more lift in her trot, but I'm not looking for a lot of that today. Today I'm looking for them just to come out, get swinging over their back, get relaxed, and just get working over their backs consistently without a lot of pressure being put on. Which is, of course, how we operate every week. You know, everyone has to remember that, you know, just because a horse goes Grand Prix, it's like Grand Prix jumping. You don't jump a Grand Prix jumper every day, nor do you ride a Grand Prix dressage horse at Grand Prix every day. If you did, you wouldn't have any horse left, because that's the highest level that the horse does. So just like a runner, you can't come out and run a marathon every day. But you can see here how she lifts up. Karen tests the sitting trot a little bit, and she stayed there quite nicely and came up pretty nicely into a working trot. Not as much lift as she will ultimately have, but not bad either. Staying quite consistent. So Karen's just taking her through a few things, a little trot work, a little canter work, just to warm up and see how she's doing in the new property. Let her get used to the new footing. Remember, anytime you change to a new place, whether it's hard, soft, or even great footing as we're going here, it's going to be different footing than the horses have been on. So things are going to change a little bit. But here you see she has a beautiful canter here in a working frame. That's not bad at all there for her. And remember, you always have to look at how horses are built. This horse is built like a thoroughbred, like many of the horses that you have. She does not have a big sloping shoulder with a neck that comes straight up out of it. So her neck is always going to be a little straight out in front of her, compared to a horse that's built in a different way. But very pleased with her canter here, very nice and balanced, and that was about all for her that day. So here we come back on the second day for Bailador. And you can see now I've just switched to a snaffle bridle. And I'm just looking for him to stretch out. He still looks a little stiff-legged behind to me, more so than I would like, but he's stretching out nicely. And once again, you see how there's not a lot of tension in the lower side of the horse's neck, which took years to get rid of him. He was a very ewe-necked horse and very sway-backed. Go back and look at some of the early videos of him that when we first brought him in, he actually had holes in his back that went all the way to the bone where a bad-fitting saddle had cut off his circulation. But that's what I'm looking for there, just to stretch him all the way down and just really get that back to stretch. So coming to the trot work today, once again, I'm not looking for even to bring this horse up into a working trot yet. I'm looking for him to just get swinging over his back. When they're ready to come up, the pole can come up and they won't break in the neck. This is always what we're looking for. And if you have a horse, as many of you have heard me say many times, when I look to horses to buy, the first thing I look at is whether they've been overflexed in the neck or not. If they have been overflexed in the neck, I know that that always takes a year to 2 years to heal that before you can even begin to bring a horse up. Because what's happened in the neck is that the ligaments have been pulled apart or stretched between the vertebrae. So you have now a soft spot in the vertebra, and you have to just let that heal before you can do anything else. But it normally takes about a couple of years to really get a horse consistent over its back so you can begin to develop collection. If you read any good book on the subject from the past, read someone like Klaus Bachenhall or Dressage Formula, or even the old Spanish riding school book, they all say the same thing. It takes 4 years to bring a horse up into collection with people who are doing it right, doing it every day, and not starting with damaged horses. So many of you are starting with damaged horses, so of course it's going to take a while. It's going to take you, if you've got a 15 or 18-year-old horse that's been hollow for years, it's going to take more than 6 months to get it right. But you can see how with him here now, he really begins to swing, how much more active the hocks are coming underneath the body now. And that's what I'm looking for him to do. Same thing here, I'm looking for just that activity, really get swinging over the back, begin to build some strength again. Look at the hocks. We're always looking for those hocks to make a round circle. So now I begin to piaffe him a little bit. You see with him, he's a little tense in the piaffe here. But notice behind the saddle here how much flatter that is. That's what I'm looking for. It's just to lower as he lowers right there, begins to lower, gives me a little more flexion in the hocks. and stay relaxed throughout this. He likes to bring his knees up higher than jump off the back. There's what I'm looking for right there, is that last little bit. So then I come back to the trot, and I can keep him up a little bit, still wants to curl a little behind the vertical more than I want to. So that tells me he's not really ready to come up into that working trot where I want him to be yet. So he needs a few more days. You can see there he wants to curl behind the bridle, but again, once again, look at the top line, how the top of the neck is lit up all the way back to the withers, and I let him back into the stretch. Notice how there's not a lot of change in the trot. As he drops down, he doesn't just totally drop or change. He continues to swing over his back. But of course, at this level, they're going to look like they're a little on the forehand. But watch the back end swing through. That's what I'm always looking for. I know that if I get that happening right there, that big swing in the trot, that it won't be long before I'm able to bring him up, which I was able to do quite nicely before he started having his foot problems from our ring where we were. So now watch right here. I'm going to show you that moment where it gets to where I want it to be and it lights up. So watch right here. Watch the back end of the horse. Watch the tempo. And watch what happens when I get right there. See how all of a sudden it begins to lift up. That's what I'm looking for. It's slowed down, and even though the neck was down, the shoulder started to swing more. Now let's watch that again. You can see he's a little bit low there. But I bring him around here and watch how things, all of a sudden it slows down right there is what I'm looking for. And see how there's a little more bounce in the trot. He starts to push up into his back. That's what you have to begin to learn to recognize. If you've all heard me say many times, this work is not just stretching a horse to the ground, leaving its nose on the ground. It's getting the back to come up. When you get the back to come up, then you can go the other way. Then you can bring them the other way. Now watch right there how it slows down, and look at the push off his back end right there. That's what you want to learn to recognize and learn to feel. So I'm very happy with that, and that's where he would have stopped today. Now this is a new horse who's just come here on this particular day. This is Tommy. He just came down from Los Angeles, and he was bought in Florida just a couple of months ago by someone, and they realized he wasn't maybe perhaps the perfect horse for what they bought him for an adult beginner. And not very well trained. He feels like a horse that probably was a hunter jumper type horse that probably did nothing but canter most of his life. He's quite dead to the mouth, quite dead to the leg. So that's what I'm working here. This is my first day on the horse just to see what he's doing. So I didn't lunge him first. I just got on him. Let's just see what this horse is capable of, and then we analyze from there. So watch his back legs here. You see how stiff-legged he is as he steps there. This is also a horse that's a little straight behind. He's a nice big horse, and actually looks like he's has a lot of flesh on him. He's not a horse that has a lot of other damage. He's just not particularly trained particularly well, in that he's just very dead to the leg. And as I said, like a lot of hunter jumper horses, they just come out and they canter, and that's kind of what he feels like has been done to him. Also a little bit overflexed in the neck. So you can see when I take contact, he wants to flex back in the neck, and that's what I'm looking for. So as soon as I feel that flexion in the neck, I'm going to immediately let him out and try to find that place where he lengthens and stretches into the contact. Now notice I'm still riding with quite short stirrups on these horses. It won't be till the end of this week that I begin to lengthen my stirrups a little bit so that then I will begin to sit more on the horses. But in the beginning, I'm just looking to be able to get off of their backs, both in the rising trot and in the canter. So again, you see how he wants to break in the neck. He flexes a little bit to the contact, but then he wants to break in the neck instead of lengthening the neck out from the shoulder. So again, watch the back end here. You see how it's kind of has that feeling, as you've all heard me say before, a bit like pulling his feet out of mud as he moves behind. There's this weird hesitancy before. So that tells you, when you see that, that tells you the horse is not swinging over its back, and it's having to make a sort of an extra muscular effort there, is just to pull his legs out of the ground, because he's not actually using the correct set of muscles that I want to ask him to do that. But watch as he comes here, he begins to stretch out, and watch with each stretch that we get how the back end begins to move a little more regularly. So in all of the arguments that anyone might have about how to train horses, we all have to agree that optimal movement is what we're looking for. So if whatever you're doing is having an ill effect on that optimal movement, well, that's where what we have to analyze in terms of what's right and what's wrong. So once again, you see how when I brought him up, he slowed down. Now I let him back out, and it's just still like a little bit like stuck in mud there. But there, once again, even just for one stride when he goes down, you see all of a sudden the hock takes a bigger step. Same thing here. Now, but you can all watch how my hands are wide. What I'm doing is just following the mouth of the horse wherever it's going. You watch my riding as I go along here. You see how consistent my upper body position is. My hands are just trying to maintain contact, keeping the slack out of the reins. But watch what I'm doing with my legs. If you watch how I'm very subtly touching the horse, there's never any kicking or jabbing. But watch here as I come around the corner. You can see me using my legs alternately there, trying to get him to respond and just lengthen out. So remember, when we want a longer walk, we use our legs alternately from side to side. As we feel that inward swing, we follow that inward swing. And that times our leg aid with the moment that the horse is about to step forward on that same side. And here he begins to loosen up a little bit. There, and begins to stretch out. Now watch right there. Every time he gets that little bit lower, we see the neck actually lengthen all the way from the withers, how we see a bigger step from the hind end. And you can see, once again, behind the saddle there's a little bit of a dip there behind the saddle. So that tells me this horse has really never been developed over his back. So again, watch how I use my legs. It's very subtly tapping. I'm using my heel a little bit to ask him to lift his back up. So remember, when we want the back to come up, we use our heel. Mr. Oliveira used to say, like plucking a guitar string underneath, a little upwards touch underneath to bring the horse up and forward. So it lifts its belly up and lets the stride come through. But watch how independently my legs are working from my hands. My hands are just taking up the slack. I'm letting him have the slack. And once again, that's why I'm widening my hands, like right there, because he starts to lose contact. So if I were trying to grapple up the reins quickly, it would take too long and we wouldn't get there. So as he begins to lift his head to want to look at something other than what I'm doing here, I just widen my hands, as I've shown you all how to do. Once again, this is not how we ride in a show ring. This is schooling riding. It's what we do to get the horse to the place that we can take it into a horse show. You know, when we get to the point where our hands can be just consistently right in front of us and the horse takes an even, soft contact, well, then that's all we do. But that takes a while if a horse is not working over its back. The same thing, you'll see how I'll just swing from side to side. I'm just following where the horse's mouth is going. Wherever he goes, I go, to keep the contact from losing that soft contact. You can see him beginning to slow down too much here. Once again, this horse that's very dead to the leg, very dead to the mouth. Kind of feels like you're on a drunk. I've heard someone refer to that, and exactly what it feels like. When horses are not over the back, you can't make them go straight. And conversely, the way we make them go straight is to get them over their backs. So I come back to try a little trot work with him here. And we can see how completely slow that is. I sit to a couple of strides just to see what it feels like, but it feels like I'm sitting in a hole, so I come right back out of that. And then once again, you can see how disconnected this horse in this video, which is why I have this here, so you can see what happens as we begin to progress with him. So again, it has that little bit of a feeling like you're on a drunk, like he wants to swing his shoulders one way, wants to swing his hindquarters the other way because there's no real connection. You can see how nothing comes through. I touch with my leg, but there's not a lot coming through. So I have to touch a few times. Watch under there as I get the heel and he begins to come forward a little bit. Once again, you can really see how hollow he is when he comes around there, and you can see behind the saddle there in silhouette there, you can see how dropped that lower back is. So he's the horse that might fool people, and that, you know, he's quite a big horse, has a lot of flesh on him. Remember, I'm quite a tall man. I'm 6'2", so you know this horse looks even a little small with me. But once again, it's not a small horse. This horse is probably 16'3" or so. So I'm trying the trot here. Let's see what happens. We get a little more active trot here. It's a little better, but really not much. And of course, every time he's distracted, the head just goes straight up in the air. But at least I get him a little more active here, and you can see how the hocks begin to work just a little bit right there. So he begins to give me a little more action through the hock. Starts to push a little bit. But we can still see how, watch the front end. He's really just kind of stabbing the ground with his front, so he's pulling himself by his shoulders right there. See how the hindquarters, you can see as he comes around the corner, get kind of left behind. Thing here, you can see how distracted, and he just hollows and drops his back out behind him. But at least I've gotten him a little more active, and there's some flexion in his hocks now, even though it's quite stabby in front. So you notice I don't try to pull his head down. All I'm trying to do is maintain contact with his mouth. Mr. Alvela used to say that the best hands in the world work just like a pair of side reins, and I think that's very true for the most part. Only we can do a little more than side reins, and that we can follow by widening my hands and doing these kind of things. I can be sure that I keep that slack out of the reins, which is what I'm doing. You see me bring that inside hand to the inside a little bit. I'm just trying to keep the slack out of the rein to begin to get some kind of feel coming through his body. But I know that I can't just ask him to pull down. If sure, I could sit on this horse and kick him and whip him up and probably pull his head right over. I'm sure he's had that done to him, but that wouldn't do me much good. But here we can see now, watch how the shoulder begins to free there a little bit. All of a sudden, right in there, it begins to free, and he starts to swing a little better. Little bit action in the hock, not exactly where I want it yet, but better than it was. Getting a little more active, beginning to get a little more push through the back. So remember, today is just an evaluation ride. He just literally had come to the stable just that day. His owners are sitting there in the chairs, so he was just trailered down from Los Angeles. And here we see a little better swing, but still quite hollow. But here at least his hocks are starting to work a little bit. And we see the front leg begin to swing a little better. But I can see that he's really just not going to get all the way there for me. But as I said, this is an evaluation ride. Let's just see what this horse can do and what it can't do, where I can get to by the end of the day. Now we'll take a very different tack with this horse after today. So today is to find out what he needs. I try a little canter work. And that's what I said. He feels to me like when I get in the canter, that seems to be the favorite thing for him to do. So I have a feeling that, like many horses that have been in 100 jumper stables, that's what he wants to do. He's been cantered, walked and cantered. That's tend to be all they do. And they don't do a good walk. They just walk and then they canter. And many 100 jumper people do just that. They do almost no flat work anymore, trying to get by on just the good movement of the horses themselves. But his canter is definitely better than anything else that he does. So that tells me that he probably has done a lot of that, just in the sense that he feels more comfortable, at least gets some kind of motivation going in the canter. That is, gets some kind of energy moving through his body. At the walk and trot, you just kind of feel like you're on something that's quite dead. But we can see that he has much more action in the hocks right now than he had before, though the shoulder is still stabbing quite a bit, which tells me I'm beginning to activate the back end, but I'm not getting him through the back where I want it to be yet. Now here we begin to get something here. So he begins to stretch a little bit. You can see even just that little bit of bringing his neck out forward, how the hind leg begins to swing more actively from the shoulder and more freely. That can only happen if the result of the impulse of the back leg is received up into the back. That can only happen if the horse's back is round, that it's lifting its back and allowing that energy to go there. That's how we get liftoff, you might say. Can't sustain it for very long, so I get a couple of good steps out of him. And that gets a little better right there. At least he starts to begin to seek the contact a little bit, but I can see that that's really not going to happen much. So that gives me a good idea where this horse is at. You can see how I bring my shoulders back there just to let him rebalance underneath my back and try to maintain that contact. Same thing here. When you watch my hands going back and forth, I'm following where he's going. I'm not seesawing. I'm just following along where he goes to. So I come back a little bit to help him rebalance a little bit and see if I can get him to let the energy come through a little more. So when you see me go back like that, I'm actually closing my thigh in the saddle a little bit to give myself to actually lift my seat a little bit. So I lift my shoulders up and back, but I tighten just around my thigh there to lift my seat off the saddle to give the horse a little more room to come back. Feeling the weight shift back and over the center of the gravity like that tends to get the horse to step under like that. Now I begin to get a little bit of release. Now look, the walk is a little better. Now watch what happens right here as we come around. Now he starts to release and starts to let some energy through his body a little bit, like that. So that's what I'm looking for. So remember, I try many things in the course of a session to see what's possible, but I come back to what I can do. And for today, just to get this horse to stretch over its back in a walk, as you could see, is quite a bit compared to where we started. Watch how he begins to stretch here when we get to the end. There, now he's begun to release down. Much better now. Look at the lower part of the neck, how we see the tension begin to disappear in the underside of the horse's neck. Once again, see in silhouette there, he's got quite a little bit of a dip behind the saddle there. So don't be fooled by horses that have a lot of flesh on them. Many horse people are fooled by fat. There's what I want. Now look how the horse, right there, he begins to step. That's what I was looking for, right there. That's exactly what I'm looking for at the end, right there. All of a sudden he connects, and there we get the walk that I'm looking for, right there. So I'm very happy with that. So now we start off on the next day with Legolas, and you'll see once again with him, I'm still riding with a fairly short stirrup. And I begin to ask to see, I've done a little bit of stretch in the walk already with him. I'm not going to show you everything I do here with these because the video would be 10 hours, 15 hours long. I wanted to give you an overview of what we do in the first week. But you see how in the walk here, now he's able to bring his head and neck up a little bit and maintain something that looks a little more like a working walk. Not fantastic yet, a little slow behind. So I do a little shoulder in to help him engage a little bit, which is, once again, the reason we do lateral work is to engage the horse up through the back. But you can still see his back is a little bit rigid on the side there. He's not really bending as much as I'd like him to do. So then I'm going to just come right back to the stretch again. But I was happy with that walk. It showed me more lift in the walk than I had on the first day. And once I get that, I'll let him back out into the walk again. So I was happy with his walk work. I come back to the trot. Same thing, I was not expecting him to be able to come up here for a few days, so I'm really looking to spend a few days just getting him swinging over his back, looking for that optimal moment, like right there. Now watch what happens right here, how it slows down. There's what I'm looking for right there. I'm going to show you that a few times. See how the horse all of a sudden slowed down, but yet lifted up. That's what I'm looking for. Watch again here. Same clip again. Watch what happens here as he comes around the corner. Still a little flat. It's a little stabby in front. Now here he begins to engage. Watch the back end. Now watch what happens right here as he comes to this side. Everything slows down. Now watch how the shoulder frees. All of a sudden the front leg starts swinging. Once again, watch that again. So I'm trying to get you guys to see these moments here when it's right. And we'll notice that I quit right after that. So I get it right, and then I quit. Right there. Now watch it lift up. See the push in the back right there. That's what I'm looking for. Watch one more time. Right there. Now watch him lift up right there. Right there is the moment I'm looking for. That instant right there. And all of a sudden he pushes up. So that was great, and I would have finished with that. So now Barb's first ride on Perhaps. And we're starting out just in a nice stretch, swinging and active. Now Barb, one thing you have to remember with horses, once we begin to develop into collection, you have to be able to sit to the trot, because a sitting trot and the horse beginning to lift up under a sitting trot is what begins to develop even further the muscles of the horse. So Barb has a bad back. She's had a lot of trouble with it and spends a lot of time trying to get herself sound enough to be able to ride in the sitting trot. So she doesn't do a lot of that. So she has to do a lot of her work in the rising trot. So I don't expect a lot of collection out of the horse because she's not going to develop a lot of collection again until she starts carrying more weight on her back once we have the horse in a working frame. That is, once she's where she is here, this is where you'd want to start beginning to ride, to sit to the trot more, to develop more strength in the horse's back. So it's a little slower when we can't, but she gets a good swinging working trot out of her here. So again, remember this horse is 21 years old. She's been going since she was 5 years old. We've had her since she was 5. So we do a little piaffe here just to activate that back a little bit more. The piaffe is a little bit not where I want it yet. You can see how she's a little stumbly in it today, not really sitting down. This is her first piaffe here. She comes back, and I just do enough to activate the back and come back to the trot. So I'm not looking for a fantastic trot there. I'm just looking for her to get a little more thrust through the hind legs, which that add a little bit. So now we have a little more lift off the ground. So she's staying a little more up in front right there as she comes around. So she does a little bit of a lengthening. She gets a little quick there, but not too bad. So now we come back and try a little sitting trot. Barb is able to do this once a week or so. So we try a little bit. And notice how she does sit to the trot, how she lifts up a little more in front quite naturally. But once again, until you get to that point where you can sit to the trot, you're not going to develop collection out of a horse until you can sit to the trot, because that added weight of beginning to lift up under and pushing that weight begins to help us develop the muscles that allow the horse to collect. But we see Barb is beginning to sit quite nicely. Her hips are starting to get loose enough to stay with the horse. And she's doing a good job of keeping her upper body back. Remember, we either want to be in motion with the horse, that is directly up and down, or sometimes we can be a little behind the motion when we want to encourage the horse out in front of our legs, for instance, or get it to lift up a little bit more. But you can see how nicely she's swinging here. Big open trot. She comes into that stretch. And notice the horse doesn't just plunge to the ground. She stays basically the same trot, but lowers her neck. And that adds a bit of loosening to the back. So when we bring the horse back up again, it should be able to stay in that same trot. So that's quite nice there. You see her swinging freely through the shoulder. That's what I'm looking for. Now we're going to show here, in this next little clip we're going to come up to, which I want you to recognize, is to watch the horse come off the ground a little more. So I'm going to ask Barb to bring the horse up a little bit as she comes around here in a moment. And you'll see her begin to lighten the front end. Not a great deal. She's not going to be, lifting a foot off the ground here yet, but you'll see a change in the horse. I ask her to bring the pole up a little bit, quiet her hands and bring them together. Not yet, but we're coming around here in just a moment. But a nice swinging trot. Now I ask her to just bring her up, keep her shoulders back, and ask her to touch a little bit underneath. That's why it's so important that we learn the difference. Now right there, see how she begins to elevate the forehand right there a little bit. That's what I'm looking for right there. So those last few strides. Watch again. It's a little flat right here. So watch as she stretches up. She brings the pole up a little bit. Right there, all of a sudden, watch the back end. See how she starts to swing. Watch that again. That's the moment I was looking for on this particular day. Right here. Now watch how she slows down. Watch the hock start to push up into the back right there. So that's what we're looking for. So that was a great work for Bob for first day. Now this is a new horse that you all have not seen yet. This is Rafaela. Rafaela is a 5-year-old that we're just starting. She came to us a couple of months ago. She was a little, she's one of those mares that's quite insecure. She wanted to run like crazy and kind of be a little crazy. And now she's beginning to settle into the work. Now this is Damien, our associate trainer, who works with us here. Damien's a wonderful rider and is a very good hand with difficult horses and young horses, and I'm going to show you some of that later on. But you notice how he keeps himself really lifted. Now Damien is a guy who does all kinds of trick riding. He's ridden in the circus, he's ridden for the Cavalier show, things like that, and jumped through hoops of fire, all of that. But that's all I'm looking for. So the horse is quite relaxed now, stretching out in the walk. Exactly where I want a young horse to start. I want to do a lot of walk work. You'll see in another video here how important that walk work is. And knowing when to begin to ask them up. But sometimes we can have a horse like this one who's going along quite well in the walk, and then you go to the trot and you may find you have something quite different. And in which case you come back and do more walk work. But here at least she's stretching out. She's accepted having a rider on her back. She's learned to stretch into the contact, which was quite a deal with her. This is a horse that wanted to run with her head up and eyeballs rolling in her head. So she's really relaxed quite a bit here in the last month or so. And it won't be long before she's being ridden and doing all manner of things. She's a nice strong horse, as you can see. Has no physical problems, which is fantastic. But, like many horses, she has that. She reminds me a little bit of a Trakehner. Trakehners are horses that are half thoroughbreds, and they kind of have a bit of crazy streak in them, but also a little bit of a stubborn streak in them at the same time. They can be quite difficult horses and don't mature until they're quite old, which is why we don't see a lot of tricaners anymore, because many of them were too difficult for amateur riders to work with, and that they mature late and they could be spooky and stubborn at the same time, if you will. Like most thoroughbreds are spooky, but they're not stubborn at the same time. Whereas we've seen a lot of warm bloods who were very kind of pig-headed, if you will, so to speak, and have that kind of, like a pony to go and rub you off on the fence. So tricaners tended to be a little, this horse is not a tricaner, but I'm just talking about various breed types. But this is what I'm looking for. She's relaxing beautifully into that stretch now, accepting contact. She's not overreacting to the rider on her back. And once again, notice how Damien's riding with his hands out wide. Now, when you see him in a subsequent couple of days, you'll see why that's so important. So he's keeping the contact. Once again, if we were trying to equitate on a horse, how could you? Imagine if you were trying to ride with your hands in the perfect little position. Well, we ride in a perfect position when the horse is going perfectly. Otherwise, we may have to do different things. But Damien does a great job, and once again, look where his upper body is. Look how nice and long his legs are down the side of the horse. And look how he's touching without any tension. He's not jabbing the horse. He's getting his heel under and touching her a little bit, getting her to lift and move forward in a very supple way. It's never stiff and kicking, but it's relaxed. That's what we have to be. If our leg is tense and we squeeze with a tense leg, the horse is going to become very dead. So this is Rafaela, very happy with where she is now. Beginning to stretch into the and of course I lunged her before we did any of this, just so you know we didn't just get on this horse. She lunged first. Now this is the very first day. This is Maya. Maya is a 2-year-old thoroughbred who is intended to go to the track. So this is the very first day. She literally came out of a pasture, barely halter broken, on this particular day, just was shipped to us. Now, I used to be the private trainer for the family that owned this horse for many years in Malibu, and were very good friends of mine. And they have raised a few thoroughbred horses. I started another one for them. The only stakes horse they've ever had was one that I started for them in just the way I'm starting this one. It went on to be a stakes winner that won nearly $400,000. So they've asked me to start this one. And once again, I'm going to do it quite slowly. So once again, for the first thing, all I've done is put the horse in the round pen. And I'm going to work the horse without any kind of reins on it, because when we first get a horse, remember, this horse is not even halter broke. I mean, does not even barely lead on a halter. So this is his first day out of a pasture, other than to get on a trailer and come to us. So I just want the horse to get ahead of my leg and move. And I was happy with that. She moved away from me, and she's letting me come up and touch her, that sort of thing. I'm being sure that she's not afraid of me. And just starting to get her to move out ahead of the whip. So I do this all without a line on, because in the very beginning when we do this kind of work, if we have the line on, the horses, they usually try to flip around on us and all that stuff, and they can get caught up in the line. So it's much easier if we can just do this like this, where we can just get in a round pen, which is the best way to start young horses. Believe me, I grew up in Kentucky and in hunting country where people didn't believe in having rings, and I started many thoroughbred horses out in the middle of fields, that have never had done anything much like this one and had to put a line on them because I had no ring to work in. So I definitely believe this is the way to do it. I've done it many times the other way, but I'm telling you, it's a lot less wear and tear on all if we do it this way. So all I'm doing here is just keeping her from turning around, and that's why I don't have the line on her. In the beginning, they're going to want to turn around. So I just keep her going, and it isn't long before she begins to relax and just stay out ahead of my leg, which is my whip in this case. Of course, she wants to cut in. So just getting the horse to stay out on that large circle is all I want, and to keep going in the circle. That's all I'm looking for in my first couple of days here. And once again, why I don't have the line on. I don't want to take the chance of her getting caught up in the line. So I'm just keeping her, establishing the idea that she will stay out ahead of my leg, which is the whip here. And just walk quietly. And once again, consider this horse literally came in from a pasture on this day. She just arrived on the truck a little ways before I'm doing this. So she's taking to all this really well, and they all will if we go about this calmly and quietly. You notice I'm never aggressive towards the horse. I talk to her nicely. I'm not expecting her to be perfect. All I want to do is just get her into the idea to stay ahead of my leg, which is the whip. And once again, it's a very natural thing. When we touch the horse, we touch right in that fleshy area above the hocks there on the horse's buttocks. Just like a horse would do when a stallion wants to move a herd. If you've ever seen them, they come and nip them up, or even an alpha mare will do that, or any other horse that wants a horse to move out of its space. So that's what I'm doing, is just teaching her to stay out of my space here. But it doesn't take long before she starts just walking along, and notice how she's already beginning to stretch. Every young horse I've ever started in my life, within a couple of minutes of just even walking around, or 10 minutes or so, they mostly will start to stretch, as you see this one doing. It's how horses were intended to move and develop. And notice as she stretches down how the hock begins to move. So it doesn't matter how old they are, it's always the same. There she begins to step more actively behind. That's what I'm looking for. So that's all I'm looking for on this day, just to stay ahead of the whip, and I'm done. So now we're going on to Bailador and his next day of the week here. Bailador. I'm a terrible Spanish speaker. But here he comes out quite relaxed, and for him that's one of the biggest things, just to get this horse so you can come out and go for a ride on him without him trying to kill you in the process. The first time I rode this horse, he had been in a stall for a while, big rainy day, and I really didn't know anything about him, and just got on him, and I tell you, it was an interesting ride, and I've never had a horse try to pull my arms out of the sockets the way this one did, and literally spook at every step. So for him, this is a big accomplishment. Now watch the hind end right there. See how it ignited? That's what I'm showing here. Now watch, he comes around the corner there. It's kind of stiff. Now watch what happens right here. That's what I'm looking for. See the big steps start to happen? And notice he comes out in front of the vertical. Watch again. Same moment. Right there, he starts to step out. Right there. And notice how then he isn't curled behind the bridle. Like you see him right there. He's still trying to curl up. There's no energy moving through the horse. Now you can see that energy starting to happen, swinging out, and then I was done with the walk. So we come to the trot work. So once again, for him, I'm just looking for a big stretch. It's going to take me a month or so. But now look behind the saddle, and you'll see how much flatter it is than it was on the first day that I worked him. And we can see how there's a little bit of bounce in the stride right there. That's what I'm looking for. Same thing this way. Nice flowing trot. Active. So we have to get that before we start going in the opposite direction. That is to bring the pole up. We want to get that optimal swing, optimal flexion and push of the hock. Then we steadily start bringing the horse up. We don't ride a horse endlessly with its nose on the ground. Some people have gotten the misconception of what we do. But once again, if you don't learn this next step of what it looks like when they start to really engage and push up through the back, you'll just go around with the nose on the ground for the rest of your life, as many Western riders do who do the peanut rolling things we talk about. It's not the same thing at all. You've got to activate the back. Then they will develop and come up. Now watch what happens right here. I'm going to show you again the moment that he gets to where I want him to go. Now watch what happens. I'm going to come around here and do a little shoulder in down this next long side here a little bit. And watch him right there as he lifts up right there. That's what I want. There's the optimal stride. Now notice he stays out in front of the vertical. There's where I want him. Now watch right here as I do a little shoulder in. You can see that shoulder stay nice and even and lift up a little bit. That's what I'm looking for. Let's watch that again. So that was that moment when he actually started to lift through the back. Once again, look behind the saddle and see how much flatter it is on this day than it was on the first day. Now watch what happens here as I come into the shoulder in. You see he's able to keep that big flexion, and right there he pushes up off the ground. Let's watch that one more time. I want to be able to get these things in your guys' eye so you can see. And if you're teachers, when you teach somebody, that's the moment to stop. Recognizing the moment you get what you want. Right there, see it lift up right there. And the shoulder becomes freer, even though the neck didn't change positions. So I do a little piaffe. Notice how much better this is under saddle today. He's not so curled over as he was the first day. He was wanting to overreact to everything. And we're going to break this down here in a minute. Not pushing as much as I want him to yet. See, the hocks he's lifting his knees, but the hocks aren't doing anything. Now it begins to lower a little bit behind. But also notice how relaxed he is through all this. Now the hocks start to work a little more right there. As I start to get a little more push right there, right there, right there. So I can feel him literally lifting me up in the saddle there as he lowers behind, right there. Very nice, right there. Now watch again, right there. There's the two moments I'm looking for, right there, right there, right there, right there. Very good. Watch again. So you can see how he starts to push the back up and start to lift the front end rather than just lifting his knees right there, right there. One more time. Right there's what I'm looking for as he lowers right there. That's what I want. And then he just walks right out of that in a very nice frame. That's what I'm looking for. So now here's Barb on her next day. Now notice the horse has gotten much more used to the footing now, and look how more active she is. She comes into a nice working trot right there. So we have a lot more swing in the trot, still not collected yet, but a pretty good working trot here. Not as much thrust in the back that I would like, but not too bad. She comes back and does a little stretch here. Beautiful, stays nice and even. Now notice she's not stretching all the way to the ground. As they develop, horses don't need to stretch their noses all the way to the ground every time. They need to just stretch it out. But if they have no top line, and they have no, all their muscling is in the bottom, when we get them to release the neck, this neck will go all the way to the ground because there's nothing else to hold them up. So that's what you have to realize. This argument about how much stretch is too much stretch or not enough stretch is all depending on the muscle that the horse has. If it has no top line, the first stretches you're going to do, the horse is going to stretch literally to the ground with its nose, because when it lets go of those tense underside muscles, the only thing that's going to happen, all it can do is let the nose all the way down. But you see, the horse at this level doesn't stretch that low down all of the time. Though once in a while, I will ask her to do that, just because I want to even stretch the back even a little bit more. But it's not necessary to go, or they stretch more out and down, and the neck is held up, so we see more contraction of the top line muscles throughout. But you see right here, that's a good working trot for her at her level. That is the level she is right now, but a good active working trot. So now I ask her to bring her up right there, and see how she comes up a little bit more on this day, right there, and see how she elevates the forehand. Let's watch that again. So watch this little flat right here. She begins to bring the pole up. It begins to slow down. Watch right there how she engages that little bit more right there. So that's what I'm looking for on this day. Shoulder becomes a little freer. Same thing here. She's able to stay up longer right there. That's what I'm looking for. And then we go back to the stretch. So a little bit at a time on each given day. So after that, we come right back to the stretch with her. Really good, just working trot. Right there's a good working trot for this horse. Not overbent, not overly flexed. But notice how much higher the neck is starting to be carried here, even for a horse who is quite naturally built with a neck that comes straight out of the body. And if you go back and look at her competition work, she looks like her head is quite high, but you notice how much more her back end is lowered in those days. And she can get back to that, but once again, Barb has to get to the point where she's sitting to the trot more for that to happen. So we come back to a nice stretch and we begin to work the horse. Each day we try to go up. I'm always looking for that little bit of improvement on every given day. I'm not looking to make everything perfect in a day. I'm looking for that little bit more engagement over the top line every day. That's what guides everything that we do. So if you haven't learned, for instance, to keep your back straight as Barb has done here, you're never going to get that to happen. If you're still leaning forward when you ride like a hunter seat rider, you'll never get much engagement over the back. So you either want to be with the motion as Barb is here, or sometimes slightly behind the motion. So very pleased with that. That showed us a good improvement. So now we come back to Tommy, who we showed you, on his next day. And Karen's working here in a lunge, as we saw that there wasn't much horse here to work with. So we're taking him back to the very beginning. Just beginning to ask him to swing and be more active in the walk and begin to stretch into those contact with the reins. I hope you can all come and visit our new stable. It's absolutely a beautiful place. We have about 30 stalls there. You can see that's the upper barn up there. That's the hay barn you see behind you there. It's set in a beautiful location. And once again, this ring is basically brand new. And you notice how perfectly flat it is, how even the steps are. You don't see a lot of big holes in it here and there. And that's what we want to have. So that's all we wanted for that horse, just to stretch out on his second day there and get into the lunge line. So here you see me on the next day with Mara, the 2-year-old. And you can see how she comes out on this particular day and pretty much goes right into that nice little walking stretch. And of course, this horse is only 2 years old now. Some people would say, well, why are you working a 2-year-old? Well, I know if I do it, it will be done right. I know this horse may or may not go to the track. She has a bit of a twisted foot, so we're looking to see whether that's going to be a problem for her in days to come, and whether it would be a problem on the track. And this horse's owner would simply, if the horse is not going to be good enough to race or have a physical problem, he's never going to race her. So he's having me start her so we can find out what's possible And if she is possible, then she will probably go to the track at some point, but not until she's going correctly. And make it easy. As they said about this one's owner said to me, when they took the other horse I trained for them out to the track, how impressed they were, how easy it was to work. There's Barb going by, giving her horse a bath. So I just let this horse stand. Notice she doesn't get overreactive. She tries to go after the other horse a little bit. That is, tries, oh, let's go with that one. But she's really a wonderful baby. It's so easy, actually, to train horses that people haven't handled a lot. It's so much because they don't have any misunderstandings about what you're trying to do, so it's quite easy. So you can see me right away now hooking the line on and getting ready to start here. So I gave her a little walk in each direction without the line on this day, and then immediately connected the line. So I can begin to take more control. I'm not a big believer in liberty training. I don't think it really does much because you can't control the body of the horse. Now, if you've trained a horse correctly and it's working correctly, then if you did liberty training after the fact and had the horse's muscles working well, that might have some usefulness, or it has more usefulness as a show thing, I think, more than anything else. But as soon as I can, then I want to begin to have some contact with the horse so I can control what it's doing, so it's not leaping around and throwing its head out to the outside or whatever the case might be. So the only liberty training I ever do is just that little bit, as you say, in the very beginning, just to get the horse moving ahead of my leg, and then I'm going to take contact here with the line. Because most of the time we are riding in reins, we are riding in bridles and saddles. I mean, you can certainly train a horse a long way, and I rode many of mine without bridles on when I was a kid. I grew up on a farm with 150 horses, and we would often jump on the ones that were ours, and my father and mother would let us have any of the ones that we wanted and that we wanted to take care of and train for ourselves, as long as I had to take care of them, as long as I took care of them, that is. And you can see how she leaped in the air a little bit. First time starting off, she's react, oh, what's that line there? She tries to actually hook it. That's why we have to be very careful when we start baby. Very often horses, and I've seen ones that we're very good at, will leap in the air and literally try to hook the line. And when they do that, of course, it becomes very dangerous because now the line immediately goes around their leg. So what you would have noticed there is I immediately pulled that line up in the air to keep that from happening when she started leaping up in the air. But she handles all this very well, and you can see already she's only been here. This is the second or third day she's been here, and you can see already her coat is looking so much better. And of course she fusses a little bit, but nothing terrible. So as I said, you certainly can ride horses. It's not a really difficult thing to do if you have the time to do it, to train horses. You just use the mane to train them, and that's how we always did it. We just held onto the mane and pulled the mane one way and used our outside leg, and pulled the mane the other way when we want to turn in that direction. That's how I was taught to do as a child, and we could ride most of our horses without saddles and bridles. But once again, I've been riding since I was 5 years old. I'm probably more comfortable on the back of a horse than I am on the ground, from having this. So it's a very natural thing. And we used to do all of those kinds of things. I have a photograph somewhere, which I'm trying to find, of my sister and I galloping across a field on our horses standing up on their backs. And we used to do all of that kind of thing, which is what led me to have the kind of seat that I have, because I grew up doing all those kinds of things. Of course, my father was a trainer before World War II, who once owned the horse and trained the horse that helped the outdoor jumping record in America at one point before World War II, had horses showing in Madison Square Garden going all the way back to the 30s. My father was quite old when he had me. He was born in 1904. And once again, we were those post-World War II babies. But as I said, I got an education that few would have. So that's all I'm looking for. So this horse to relax like that. And then just stop and we're done. Now today I'm starting off with Bailador on this particular day. All I'm doing is just doing some walk work with him. And once again asking for a little piaffe, engaging him up to the back. And you see he reacts something there and gets a little strong. They'll do that occasionally. But notice he didn't bolt off. And notice I'm doing all this in a snaffle. If he was afraid of me, I wouldn't be able to hold him here. I'm not holding him here. The weight is I'm just on the weight of the rein. So if I try to do like there, now we begin to lower. Now watch what happens right here. I want you to see this moment. Here's when he kicks in. Right there's when the back starts to lower. Right there's the moments I'm looking for. Right there. Now watch that again. So that's pretty good there, but watch what happens right here. It all of a sudden kicks in right there, the steps I'm looking for as he pushes off the ground. And look how flat the back is now. Once again, look behind the saddle and look how I brought that loin up from that movement. Right there. So that's all his work for the day. He did a walk. So now we see Karen on Tommy's next day. And she's just going to work him in hand to start off with here, as many of you do your horses, just getting him to stretch out. So we saw that we got him to stretch a little bit out in the work on the lunge line the other day, and that looked a lot better, stretching into the contact. And we see how much better he already looks, just even this work in hand. Remember what he looked like on the first day that we saw him. Those hind legs were just really stepping, were barely stepping. So now we have more action. Now we're seeing to get a regular walk. Now look at the difference here, how he's picking up the legs. Remember that first video you saw of him? He literally had that look like he was stuck in mud. Now look at the difference now. He's picking the legs up and putting them back down. And the longer he stretches, the more that happens. So once again, as a horse develops, they don't have to stretch all the way to the ground. But in the very beginning, horses that have been hollow or damaged, they have to go all the way to the ground. So that was fantastic for him for his next day. So now we're doing the next day with Raffaella. That's his owner standing there. Sarah Montral, who many of you know, who's been an associate trainer of ours for many years and worked for me for about 3 years. So this is going to be her new horse, but she has a big executive job now, and so she's paying to have her horses trained and will till we get this one going for a little while. She's traveling a great deal now with the job that she has. So once again, she's already lunged and gotten into a good place on the lunge line. So I'm taking you through the process that we do with this one so you can see how we go through the process of getting a rider on the back of a horse. And it's always a big step. You can have horses, as you'll see, not on this day, but I'll show you another one in a couple of days here when we get to this next one. You know, how unpredictable young horses are and the skills that you have to have necessary. So, you know, if you have not been riding horses for years and feel totally comfortable and have control of your autonomic reflexes. Those are those reflexes that make you curl up into a ball, that make you scream, that make you kick with your legs when something goes wrong. If you have not gotten control of those things, you should not be on a young horse or a difficult horse, because when something goes wrong, you will revert to throwing your shoulders forward, and which is what the natural thing for people to do. We have to very much work against our natural instincts. You know, the human body wants to curl up into a ball when something goes wrong, and when you curl up into a ball on the back of a horse, pretty soon you're not on the horse any longer. But this is just what I'm looking for. As I showed you in the last one, it's going to be quite a few days of just we lunge her. She gets consistent in the contact. And then we come back, and I always start off just walking along with the horse, just like you see me doing here. So the horse just gets used to having somebody on their back, but somebody is walking them along, and then slowly, once I'm sure the horse is accepting that all right, then we begin to go out onto the larger circle. And I do that for quite a while in the beginning, till we get the horse to the point where we can ride it off of the lunge line. But in the very beginning, safety is always what we have to be aware of. And of course, as I said, with young horses, you never know what's going to happen and how they're going to react to things. You know, a horse that can seem as calm as this one does right now, a little noise can happen, and all of a sudden you find you have something very different because the horse doesn't have enough training that, you know, when something goes wrong, the training clicks in. So when they don't have that kind of training, in other words, with their responses have become automatic to the cues, then they just revert to whatever they are, however they would normally react to something. And if that means becoming ballistic, that's often what they do. So just because a young horse is calm does not mean that it's where you want it to be able to get on and ride it and to go out and take it out on trails and things like this. I've seen so many people hurt in my life because they have a young horse and they think, oh, it's really calm in the ring. You know, they've been riding it for a week. Let's take it out on a trail ride with my buddies. You know, and the first thing that happens is, you know, something happens, you know, an animal comes out of the bushes, or one of the other horses freaks out at something, or a car, or all the various things that can spook horses, and you find that, oh, while the horse is really quite calm in the ring, you get out someplace else, and there's not enough depth of experience of the horse that it's going to keep that going, and that if something goes wrong, and they just revert to being a wild animal, if you will. But this is all going well, and we build up from this experience, just going slowly, quietly on the lunge line. Once again, notice how Damien keeps his shoulders up and back. And that's so important. The hardest people to train, I find, are people who've ridden in a hunt seat, you know, sort of exaggerated forward seat, because they have no sense of getting their shoulders back. And when something goes wrong, they go off the horse, which is actually, if any of you know the name Caprilli invented the forward seat. Now, he invented the forward seat where you pinch with your knees and your lower legs are off of the horse, the old school forward seat. Unfortunately, he died falling off on his head because when you ride like that, pinching your knees, when something goes wrong, you're just a projectile out over the top of the horse's head. So it's so important to learn this for all riding because you never know. The most experienced horse in the world, when they have an earthquake or a bomb goes off, who knows what. All the things that can send horses, into a tizzy, so to speak. If we're not in the right position, if our heels are not down and our shoulders are not back, for instance, even if our shoulders are back and the horse, reacts violently to something, if you grip with your leg, it's going to be even worse because now you're sending the horse on, forward, and active. Remember, it's always hands alone, legs alone. We never oppose the aids, and that's what's wrong with this modern system of people holding 20 pounds in their hands, or 5 pounds or 10 pounds or whatever they've been told, but holding against the mouth of the horse while they kick. Well, A, the horse is just going to go dead to everything when you do that, which is why we see so many damaged dressage horses these days. And how many of them just become completely dead? They go along for a while, but then finally they just get dead to everything. So he wants to take a little scratch there. So as long as you are opposing the aids, that's what's going to happen. The horse is just going to get duller and duller. Some of them will put up with that for a while, but that's why you see so many dressage people having to beat horses up so much, because they're holding on to the mouth at the same time. So it's just like driving your car with the brakes on. Never going to work very well. Once again, notice how Damien keeps his shoulders back. His legs are down and underneath him and his toes lifted. Really good stretch here. So that's really what I'm looking for. Now notice when she gets in that stretch, watch the back end again. This is what, whenever we're evaluating anything the horse is doing, we have to be sure we look at what the back end is doing. You say, well, and even if you say, oh, the horse is on the forehand, we'll look at what the back end is doing. If the back end isn't moving, that is, the hocks aren't flexing, then the horse is probably just dragging itself along by the front end, which you see her do once in a while, like there. And then she starts to step more actively, then the back end starts sending her forward. So being able to recognize the difference between those two is very, very important. So how beautiful and relaxed that was, just what I'm looking for. So now we go to the next day with Tommy. Karen riding, and notice now today, remember when you saw me on that very first day ride this horse and what the walk looked like. Now we can see 3 days later the horse's walk is beginning to open up. Beginning to be able to keep the stretch quite nicely. Still not quite active enough yet, but we'll have a moment here in the future when we really see it turn into something really good here for a moment. And we can still see how it's, once again, we see that stuck in the mud look behind. So we're getting a pretty good stretch, but now not quite enough activity. There's nothing flowing through the body of the horse yet. When horses get really good, that's what's so exciting thing, when you can really feel that energy flowing through the body. That's what we ride. It's almost like you feel like you're on a wave. And you don't feel that tension in your hands, and the horse carries you to where you're going. As long as you're holding 20 pounds in your hands, I guarantee you, the horse is not carrying you anywhere. It's dragging you to wherever it's going. Even if it has big active knee movement and hock movement, we see so many horses in dressage today that, yes, their knees are coming up, but the hocks are not coming through. Remember, in correct work, the hind leg is always swinging through in the trot at the same level, in other words, the same plane as the front leg is swinging. When you see those become separated, as we see in these horses today that are doing this, it's really more of what we used to call a Spanish trot, where the horse throws his legs straight out in front of it, but the hocks aren't doing anything. The horse isn't lifting up anywhere. And once again, that lift is what we talk about when we talk about what collection is. Collection is not shortening a horse. Anybody can shorten a horse down, and of course they all feel more balanced when they shorten the stride. But if you take that same horse and go out and try to gallop across the field, you soon find yourself on your head. Now watch what happens right here. There, he starts to swing and stretch into the contact. That's the moment that we were looking for, right there. Now watch that again. Comes around, still a little bit inactive here. Now watch what happens here as he comes around. And he starts to swing and stretch into it like that. Same here, he starts to swing more actively and stretch. So that's all we were looking for this horse for that day. So that was fantastic. That shows me a good improvement. So here we are on Legolas again. And he's feeling a little stronger on this day. That his back is feeling better up underneath me. So I may try to do a few more things with him today. A little bit flat here. I tried to bring him up into a working trot, and that's way better than the other day. So notice he comes up and the front end lightens a little bit. And then I put him back into a stretch again. Now we're going to watch the moment right here when he lightens up a little bit for me. So watch here, you can almost see his back end kind of falls out a little bit right there. Now watch what happens right here as he starts to lift up and push. Right there. There's the moment I'm looking for. Watch it again. Right there. Watch him lift up. And keep that thrust. Look at the thrust bringing the forehand up. Same thing again here. Recognizing those moments. Now once again, look where I am. I'm straight above my leg. Right there. That's what I'm looking for. Do you see he starts to lift up and the shoulder becomes free, even though the neck is down. And then I bring him back to a walk. Now I do a little canter on this day. See how his canter is beginning to feel. Once again, you see how I'm still working in a 2-point position here. I don't feel like he's strong enough, but I'm going to sit a little bit here and see how it feels in the canter. Not too bad today. A little better than it was the other day. Still not enough lift in the canter as I want, but way better. But I still come back to the work in the 2-point position to give his back more freedom in the canter because I don't feel like it's going to really lift up much. But I try it again to sit again, and that's pretty good there. He lifts up underneath me a little bit, not too bad. And I come back to the 2-point position again. Just let him roll along underneath me. Now, once we can canter our horses, they build a lot of strength in the canter. But if the horse can't at least canter united and somewhat over its back, it doesn't do you any good. But once you have a decent canter, it does a lot for the horses. Once it is a decent canter. Once again, let me reiterate that. You see me sit my seat in the saddle here a little bit. You see him lift up a little bit. That's what I'm looking for. So that was fine for today. Got a little more power. And after doing the canter, we'll see that he has a little more power in the trot. So I come back to that trot after the canter, and he's got a pretty good lift there. He's got more action behind. It's a little quicker than I want it to be right there. But there he gets a little bit lower, and notice how now he gets a little more stretch. So on this particular day with him, I'm letting him go all the way down. But look how much more thrust I have out of the back leg when I do. So each day I'm putting the head and neck where it needs to be to get that thrust. So I'm very happy with that. Good transition back to the walk. Now picking up with Bailidor again on this day, we start off with a little piaffe today. Of course, I've walked him and done a little bit of warm-up before this. And we're going to watch once again. There's the moment I want right there. Watch it again right there as he begins to move those hocks, comes up and down, lowers a little bit behind. Watch it again. Like that. And he gets a little lift. And then I come back to the trot. Gives me a good stretch after that. Of course, after the piaffe, I always want to test at this level that everything is happening correctly there. That is, that he's staying relaxed. So I come back and just give him a good stretch in the walk. Taking a look behind the saddle there a little bit. A little better than we started a few days ago, but coming up. So today I begin to try his canter. And once again, his canter was extremely disunited when I started working with this horse. But now he has a pretty nice canter. Once again, notice that I'm riding him mostly in a 2-point position here still. But that's a pretty balanced canter. I bring him up a little bit, and we'll see how the forehand comes up a little bit. Doesn't break over too much. Wants to break a little bit, but not too badly. Gets a little behind the vertical, so I come back into the 2-point position again to let his neck back out. So once again, I tried to sit, and I felt his back sinking out from underneath me. So I came back up into the 2-point position. Gets a little tense there coming around. He sees his buddy in the barn there, but that's not too bad. For him, that's pretty fantastic. So that was a nice canter over his back. As I said, it took me years to be able to canter this horse. His back was so bad. And after the canter, I come back to another trot and just let him stretch out. Once again, looking for that optimal swing. And same thing with him. This horse is a horse with a very bad back. Now, some of you I know are starting with these kinds of horses. You just have to be patient. Most of them can come around, but imagine yourself, if you're 70 years old, and you've been unfit your whole life, it's going to take you a while to get back in shape. Well, same thing. This horse came to me as 11 years old. He'd been through many, many trainers, most of which gave up on him and got sore and unsound every time. So it's taken me years to get to this point with him. But I enjoy all horses, and I enjoy the challenge of it. And once again, I like to save them all if I can. A nice canter in this direction. You'll see I even get a little stretch in the canter out of him, which years ago would have been impossible. So when you cantered, this horse's head went straight in the air, and then of course the next day he was sore. So for him to be able to stretch like this in the canter is great, and it even starts to bend a little bit. That's what I'm looking for right there. For him to be able to come out like that and carry me without spooking. That's beautiful right there for him. Just what I'm looking for. So I would have come back and done a little more trot, and then I finished with the piaffe. Look how nice the piaffe is today. Nice and relaxed, couple of steps, and then I just let him walk back out. So remember, the piaffe is to engage the back. That's why I do it. So moving on here, the next day with Mara. Look how nice and calm she is today. Also note how completely shiny, and she's starting to add weight really nicely. Now we've just had her feet trimmed for the first time. She has a little bit of a crooked front right leg, which we're working on with this horse. She actually had to be in cast when she was born, and that's also the question about whether she's going to make a racehorse or not. And if she doesn't, she'll make a very nice riding horse. But how beautifully she's coming out, and once again, you see this is only like 3 or 4 days. I think this is the 4th day she's worked. How much more completely relaxed she is, how she's staying at the end of the circle, so to speak. So I still haven't put the line on her yet. Now each day, like everything, I always build upon things. So I always start the way I started before. I start her without the line on at this level, and then I add the line to what I'm doing. So I build on that steps. I do step 1, step 2, step 3, and I do that the same way. Then as the horse gets better, for instance, I might begin to start at step 2, then 3, then 4, then 3, then 4, then 5, so to speak. But I always want to do the same things every day. Horses respond best when we work in that manner. So we're always building on that foundation, if you will. But how beautifully relaxed she is in all of this. And once again, you see she's already starting to put on a little weight. The steps are beginning to become larger. And how much she's beginning to stretch. So again, I haven't done anything. I've just let her stretch. So now I've added the line. And how beautifully she stays out there now. She wants to cut in on me a little bit. I just lift my line a little bit and send her back out to the end of the circle. This isn't a great round pen here. It's a little bit on the small side. We are building a new one that's going to go in here pretty soon that will be ultimately covered. So we're very excited about that. And we'll have a place where we can work our horses through the rainy seasons, which will be fantastic. But this one is a little smaller than I would like it to be. This is only about 17, 18 feet across. So I'd like it to be 20 meters. Or I'm sorry, this is about 15 meters across. But you can see how that trot's becoming more regular now. Now the trot she hasn't started to stretch into yet, but it's beginning to get there. She has moments where she starts to put her neck out and she's experimenting with finding her movement, so to speak. Which if we let horses, they will do in most cases when we start babies. I've started many, many babies, and almost all of them start to stretch within a few minutes of lunging them. Or certainly within a few workout periods. So I changed directions. And that's all I'm looking for at this level. Just for us to stay out away from me, establishing those foundation rules that she stays out away from me, yields to my body. Now as you can see when I changed directions there, I just took the line back off and I go in this direction. And I'll add it back in this direction. But notice how calmly I'm doing this. I'm never chasing the horse, whipping her. I'm never getting after her strongly. I'm just, every time she tries to come in, you see me run the lash out there a little bit and just give her a little touch. It doesn't take whipping. In most cases with whips, you should be, touching them. We should call them touchers rather than whippers. so to speak. But people have the idea when you say whip that it means you're whipping something. But no, if you're using the whip correctly, mostly you're just touching the horse with the whip. And that's all it takes. There, look how nice she begins to stretch into that contact there. A little slow there, but she stretches nicely. And now we start doing a little trot with her. And you can see how she still tries to cut in on me a little bit. But because she is answering to the whip enough here, she gets right away from me and I don't have to worry too much about her. She tries to do that little kicking thing up and a little buck. That's very normal for young horses. They're going to do that kind of stuff. And once again, that's why I do that beginning work with them without the lunge line on. So in case she does, snag the whip or spin around on me, I don't want the horse caught up in the lines or me caught up in the lines, which is the most dangerous thing that can happen to you or the horse. Same thing there. You see her try to cut in, and I'm just sending her out so she just gets nice and consistent and stays out there at the end of the line with a nice regular trot. That's all I'm looking for. Now notice she doesn't have a bit on or anything yet. You'll see me go through all the stages of that as we go on in weeks to come. It's so wonderful now that we have a really beautiful place to work out of. We have a lot of new horses coming over the next couple of months, and it's going to be a lot of fun to develop a lot more upper level and beginning to move you guys up so you can really see how we move up through the levels and what the stretch does and how different it works with different horses and where we need to be on different days. You can't put any of it as a hard and fast rule other than the fact that you need to get your horse working over its back. So as far as where the head and neck ends up, it depends on the horse itself and how the horse is built. So she was beautifully relaxed. Notice she immediately just halts for me, lets me come up and touch her. So very happy with that. So now here we come back to Legolas on his next day. Walk is much better here. He's starting to pick up the legs and put them down a little more. Once again, remembering that all these horses had really a very slow 4 months here. Quite a few of them got sore from the footing that we were on over there. Not only was it hard as rock, but it was very inconsistent. So it had a lot of soft spots and then it had hard spots. But once again, it's not just whether the horse is, how soft the ground is on top. It's how soft it is going into the ground. Now notice that time he had a little resistance, but how nicely he came up into a working walk. So this is the first day I asked for that, and he actually comes up without just curling over in the bridle. I actually feel his back up underneath me here a bit in this. So I'm very happy about that. So the first day of the week, this is the first day he's really brought his back up underneath me in the walk, and once again, he becomes so much more consistent once he does. I can feel him beginning to become consistent in the bridle, so I'm very happy with that. He comes around here. He could have a little more push up through the back, but notice that it's rhythmic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what we're looking for. So it's the same steady rhythm. You can see right there when he came to the corner how he lost that rhythm for 1 second, tried to drop his back out from underneath him for a minute. But very pleased with this walk work today with him. He's coming up very nicely, and notice he's not overbending like he was the first couple of times. He's staying up, and we see how the whole top line is lit up. Now, you've all have seen videos of this horse at a much higher level than I'm riding him here. And once again, that's why I have to go back to this level, because he lost a lot of that strength. So I have to go back and regain that strength. I can't just start where I left off. If your horse has been off for more than 2 weeks, you're pretty much, you've got to take a step back, some to a greater or lesser degree. But you always have to do that. You start to lose muscle tone after only 2 weeks of inactivity. But how nice was that? He came up very evenly under my back and lifted me in the saddle, and I come back to a stretch. And so I'm just practicing that a few times. Let's see where I can get to. Can I bring him up again? So he's down in a pretty good stretch there, and notice he's not as deep as he was the other day. Look how he becomes more active when I do stretch him there. That little bit more, we get a little more step. So that's what I'm looking for there. So I kept looking for the activity of the back end. So I let him go as deep as I needed to do to get the activity behind. That's what we're always trying to do. So coming back to the stretch and the trot here. And once again, quite deep in the stretch and the trot here. He's still not where I want him to be. But I'm going to test out the working trot a little bit and see if he can come up today. So you can see how this time, watch how he elevates the forehand right there. quite nicely. There, so he came up, just as he did in the walk work today, he was able to come up into the working trot a little more. Even gives me a little bit of a lengthening of stride here, coming across the diagonal. Look how much action, how he was up in the trot. So that's exactly what I was looking for. Now I come back to the canter here today. I start off in the 2-point position, just as I did the other day. And I'm going to experiment with trying to let myself sit down into the saddle. He tries to stall on me a little bit. You see, I bring my seat into the saddle there a little bit. And this time he's able to support it a little better. I come back up in the 2-point position again. And I'm happy with that. Come back to a working trot. That's what I was looking for. Can I make a transition back to a working trot without falling apart? A little bit tense. I come back and try a little lengthening. And it's not too bad. He comes through behind, but it's gotten too tense in the bridle. So I come back to the stretch. So he wasn't really able to stay up and give me that big lengthening like he's capable or will be capable of doing again as soon as I regain that strength. So I tried. It got a little tense. He tried to swing through, but I come back to the stretch again. Thing here. All the way down. This is what we're looking for here, that moment that he begins to spring off the ground. Watch here again. There he begins to spring off. Right there is the connection I'm looking for. Watch it one more time as we come around here. There's the connection I'm looking for right as it comes around. There's what I want right there. So that's how low I had to be with his head and neck. They're all built a little differently. So now we're picking it up. I'm going to show you a little bit about flying changes here. This is Damien riding perhaps to school a few flying changes. Now I want you to watch the difference here of what happens here. Now that was a little bit of an early flying change that he did just there. He's going to come back and do a little sitting trot on him and come back to the canter. Now watch the back end of the horse this time. Now this is not going to be, this is an almost good flying change, but not quite. Watch what happens when he goes to the flying change. Now watch how he kind of skips behind. You see how she changed in front before she changed in back. Watch the hind end. It kind of sticks in the ground for a second and then comes through. So that was a late flying change. Watch it again so you can see it. There. See how she skipped through in front, but there wasn't that lift. Now watch this time. This is a correct flying change. See how she lifts up and the back end comes through at the exact same time as the front end. Watch again. Here it goes. And changes through clean. That's what I'm looking for. Watch again. So that was a correct change. Anything less than that, and it wasn't. There. See how she lifted the front end and came through behind. Exactly what I'm looking for. And after that, we come back into stretch her. Now, of course, she was warmed up. I'm showing you the sort of moments I want you to see out of these so you can see some differences. And, of course, we just come back to a stretch after that and let her stretch out. That's a lot of hard work. She's just starting to do those flying changes again. So very happy with all of that. She's back to a walk, and that's the end of her session. Now, of course, that wasn't all we did. We spent a lot of time stretching and warming up to that. So coming back to Legolas here on the next day, we see now he's coming up better into a working walk. I do a little counter flex there, then I come back to a shoulder in. And he's able to keep that shoulder upright a little more today. When I first started him the other day, he was trying to, as he did there, he tried to throw the shoulder out on me, so I just straightened him and got him back off my inside leg again. But I'm happy with this walk work. He's supporting me quite well in all of this. Notice he's reaching up, stepping up into the track of the front foot, lifting up his legs and putting them down again. And I can feel that he's staying up underneath my back. I come back to the shoulder in this direction. We notice it gets a little bit stiff there. The hind leg gets a little bit inactive. He's a little bit stiff on that side, so he's not really bending. So you'll see me come back and straighten him up a little bit here. I'm just letting that neck be out in front of me, but notice he's staying in front of the vertical today. So if his back weren't up, he'd start curling up behind me. So every time he drops his back, very often you'll see me go back to the stretch. But he's staying up quite nicely in a good working walk, giving me a good rhythm in the working walk. I do a shoulder in here. Once again, and this shoulder in comes back and is better this time. Little better bend, little more reach. And he's letting me control that outside shoulder. The first couple of times you saw how he tried to flip around on me and tried to throw the shoulder out rather than stand up to the outside rein. So I came back and just corrected that. Now, of course, I'm picking you up. This up, I would have already walked him and stretched him out before I did any of that, of course. I'm just trying to show you the improvement moments here. And now I come back to the stretch and let him stretch all the way down again. And I come back and bring him back up into the working walk again. And now after that little stretch, we see that the back end becomes active again. So that's the point of the stretch. We have to refresh the muscles. If everything starts feeling stale, that is, the back end isn't moving, the horse isn't lifting you in the saddle anymore, then we have to come back and refresh those muscles with another stretch. And there he stays quite nice in the working walk, a little straighter, answering to my outside rein quite nicely. Stays there throughout the change, and once again the rhythm is still pretty good, staying pretty consistent for me. And of course I come back to the stretch after that. I don't ask him to hold it for very long. So as the horse gets trained, as he gets more physically fit, that is, not only just trained, but how long we can stay in anything is the training, is the level of fitness that he has achieved. So as he achieves a higher level of fitness, I can maintain the frames longer. You know, no horse should ever work for longer than an hour unless you're doing endurance horses, and even that is done in very slow stages. Just like a runner doesn't go run a marathon every day, because it takes a lot out of you to do that. So we can't perform at Grand Prix every day, or even at the highest level any horse is. But I'm pleased with that walk today. So now I'm going to step up to the next level and ask him to do a little half pass and see how that's doing. This will be the first half pass that I've done on him. You can see the walk here wants to be a little bit slow, fast, slow, fast. So I'm not super happy with that, but I bring him back up and he stays pretty supportive. So I'm going to see if he's beginning to move into the bend now on this particular day. And that's not too bad. Notice I keep the forehand slightly in advance. And he starts to step through quite nicely right there. So for his first half passes coming back, I'm pleased with that. Gets a little inactive there. Hard for him to maintain it. Tries to come out of it a little bit, but I correct him again. And now he wants to get a little bit overbent there, so he begins to lose impulsion. So, of course, I'm going to come right back to the stretch again, because I don't want that to become a habit. So as soon as I feel that overbend, he drops his back. The other option would be to try to get after the horse and beat him up a little bit to try to get that to stay there, and that's not at all what I want to do. So now coming back to the trot work here, he's done a little bit of stretch work, but we can see here now I'm able to bring him up into more of a working trot. Watch him connect in the working trot. Watch that again. You see how nicely he connects and starts to push up and starts to push through. That's the moment I was looking for today. Watch it again. Watch there as he pushes up and comes through. So I'm very happy with that today. One more time. Now I'm sitting to the trot. So now I'm beginning to add that sitting trot to it. He's able to stay up underneath me right there. How beautifully that stays there for me today. So that tells me I'm on my way to getting this horse's back up and consistent again. Before this, when I tried to sit to his trot, and you see me coming around here in the sitting trot now again, and he's able to stay up, and look how lifted the forehand is when I'm able to do that. So, but just also know, once you get to that point of consistency over the back, if you don't start sitting correctly, you're not going to develop much higher than that. In other words, if you just want to ride, you can get a certain level of working trot, but if you want to move beyond the working trot, you've got to start sitting. All right, there he stays very consistent for me in that sitting trot. And then, of course, I come back to the stretch again and let him go back all the way down again. But notice how here in the stretch, his neck is not down. He's not down so far. As I showed you the stretches the other day, he needed to get his nose all the way to the ground in order for me to get the activity behind. Watch the sitting trot again, how he stays nicely up underneath me through all of that. Watch again here, and watch the halt right there. So when a horse is moving correctly, all you do is stretch up, and they will step right into that correct halt. Overflexes a little bit in the downwards transition, but not bad, and steps up square, very much what I'm looking for. So now we see Damien once again on Perhaps. You see her canter is looking a little better now. And she's lifting in front a little more. You know, she's still trying to straighten there a little bit. See him widen his hands just a little bit. But we can see how her forehand is a little more elevated on this day. And that's just what I'm looking for. So that tells me she's starting to have more strength. She's starting to lift up a little more. That means the thrust of the hind legs is starting to lift the front end off the air, into the air. That's what we're looking for. Remember, collection is not the, now we're doing a little counter canter here. And how beautifully she does that. And now we're going to come back and study these flying changes again. We come back to that work. So watching the first one here. Does the same thing. Gets a little squirrely, but she changed through clean, but it's a little squirrely. But a little bit late behind. She kind of sticks the back leg a little bit. Watch again. Sticks the back leg, but then steps through. Now let's watch the next flying change in this direction. Now watch what happens here. This time she'll be able to change to clean. There. And you see how nice and straight and lifted that was. It was a little straighter without so much hesitancy. And boom, she goes right through, lifts up in front, and there we go. Let's watch it one more time. There we go. That's what we're looking for. So once again, we come back to that stretch in the trot. Very happy with that. And that's her workout for that day. Now, of course, she had stretched before we did any of that. But we can see how there was a little bit of improvement in both directions, a good improvement to the left today. Her right canter lead has always been difficult. She was very, very weak on her right hind leg. Has always had a little bit of problem there. So coming back to Mara again. Once again, you see how we start her off. Same thing without a great deal of contact. With the rein, that is. So I start her just as I've done each and every day. In the same way, but each day it gets easier. Notice this day she's pretty much right out there, stretching nicely. She's not trying to cut in the circle so much. Always building on that same foundation that I did the few days before. Now remember, this horse has only had, this is its 4th or 5th day of being worked at all in its life, coming out of a pasture. And the beauty of doing this work is once you do it, I never try to teach horses to lead, if you will, from the ground. I teach them to lunge, and that teaches them to lead. So when you're working with babies, they can be quite fractious and jump on top of you and all kinds of things. If you do this work before you worry about how well they lead, this teaches them to lead correctly. So really good stretching with this horse on this particular day. It's really starting to come together for her. Super relaxed about it all. Notice how she now halts immediately. When I say halt, she even looks to me to come over to her. So she's beginning to work with me, as I like to say. Now, what I always like to do when I'm working the babies is, you know, I would change them around. I never want horses to flip around on their own. So you see with this there, I go to her, and I make the change. Even if I'm doing it without the line, I be sure I go to her, I ask her to stop, then I change her direction. The hardest thing with horses and what becomes difficult, people, with this work is the horse starts flipping around on you if you're not very good and very quick at keeping them ahead of your leg, which of course I mean by the whip. So I always want them to wait for me. I want to halt and then let me come to them, then change the direction. And how beautifully she stretches out. And you can see her walk each day getting longer. Her hocks are taking a bigger step. If you go back and look at some of the early videos, how stiff she looked in some of those. And how she starts to stretch down there. That's always what I'm looking for. So now I have the line back on her. And they're always going to react a little more for the line, once again, as I told you before. We always have to be sure I'm keeping that line up. When they start to leap around, that I lift my hand up so the horse can't throw a leg over that line, which I've seen happen to many people to disastrous consequences. And you see like that. I mean, babies are always going to do that little stuff. She sees somebody near her and she wants to react out a little bit. But how nicely now she's beginning to stay out there. You know, she hops around a little bit. They're bound to do that. She sees somebody over there who's coming in her direction. So she wants to go, oh, I want to go that way. So when she does that, that's when I send her forward the line a little bit. Get her back stretching out forward again. She's becoming a little more active in her trot. We see a little more flexion in the hocks on each day. Now she's staying out there at the end of the line. Exactly what I'm looking for with the young horse. She's staying relaxed. She's yielding to my body, yielding to the whip. I'm beginning to understand the idea of something contacting her, meaning the line here. So I'm very pleased with where she is. And with most babies, this is about how it goes. You know, some of them are a little more difficult than others. And of course, if they're stallions, they're a little more difficult than others. But it basically goes along the same way. And if nobody has made a mistake with a young horse, it's pretty simple and straightforward. And that's why I really encourage you taking these steps with everything that I show you, you know, so that you understand where you were and how you take the step to the next step, And also, I hope what you see with this in terms of where the horse stretches to, that it's greatly different with each and every different horse. We have to take into consideration their conformation, how damaged they are when you start. And if you're starting with a 20-year-old horse that's been swayback for 10 years, you know, and has kissing spine and all kinds of other problems, well, you're going to do something, you know, the amount of time it's going to take you is going to take a great deal longer than if you're starting with a young horse who doesn't have any problems at all. Physically, that is, or mentally. You can see how when I change direction, she still wants to react a little bit every now and then. Very normal for young horses. There's Mick coming out to help me and oversee. And staying relaxed throughout. You can notice that at no time has this horse ever gotten into a lather, and it's quite hot these days where we are here. So I never want to get the horse all lathered up, this sort of thing. Not the, occasionally, you'll have a baby that will do that to themselves. I mean, there are ones that worry more than others, so to speak. But most of them come around quite quickly once they understand all I want is for her to stay ahead of my leg. Just like all a stallion or alpha mare would want out in a herd was them to move someplace and just move that way. I'm not asking for any great thing. I'm just asking you to move away and yield to my body and my contact. Beautifully, she comes down in the stretch and the walk here. And this is what I'm looking for. So I want that relaxation all the way around. You know, some people have this idea that thoroughbreds are crazy. You know, nothing could be further from the truth. They're crazy if they've been made crazy. And just like the racetrack, there are good trainers and there are bad trainers. There are trainers who understand how to run a horse over its back and those who don't understand that at all and have no understanding of how to get a horse to run correctly. They just run them, if you will. So when you're on the racetrack and you watch any race, pull some up and see what I'm talking about. You know, if the horse starts to throw his head in the air coming down the track, you know that it's lost its back if the horse's head is being thrown in the air with each stride. If you can find a video of Secretariat running sometime, if you talk about round, he was the roundest horse I've ever seen. An amazing cat-like back that would come up underneath him. But he was trained that way. It's not some more naturally get their backs underneath them than others, but they can all be trained to do so. And if you don't, if Secretariat had not been trained, even though he was a great horse, and yes, they say he had twice the heart, but they never talk about if the training had been incorrect, he would have never been the horse that he was. So all that has to, you know, no great horse is ever great, you know, in terms of what they do with humans, unless they've been trained in a great way as well. It's not just the piece of horse flesh. That's the problem. People make that mistake with, oh, this horse has this or that breeding. Well, you know, and maybe that horse was a fantastic horse, and the next one, for instance, if it wasn't trained that way, it's not going to be. You're not going to have the same result. So now we're going to get to a little part here. This is going to be a lot of fun for you to see, and also a perfect example of the level of skill that you need to be able to ride a horse at this level. So this is Zafira again. Once again, she's the 5-year-old, and she's doing everything very, very calmly. And I have my very capable rider, Damien, on the horse, who's been on horses his entire lifetime. Some of you should go online and see some of the videos of him from the past, jumping through hoops of fire and various things like this. This man is very comfortable, but he got uncomfortable with how the horses were being trained with the work that he was doing. He wanted to go on. He was, while he could do all these things and had done many things, his horses were all hollow, and he had enough sensitivity that he didn't want to do that anymore. He didn't want to ride. I mean, many of these shows that we see, even these traveling, Spanish riding school shows and so that we see, once you begin to see whether the horse can really analyze horses' gaits, you'll see that maybe the first horse in the line is going pretty good, and by the time you get to the last one, it's just dragging its back legs along. So, and that's unfortunate. When you have to do something like a show when horses have to come out. This is if you had to show a horse every day. Once again, horses can't show at the highest levels every day, day after day after day. In other words, we're always sequencing them through our week. For instance, we always start off with an easy day in the beginning. Next day gets a little harder. Next day gets a little harder. And then we give them a day off again. We feel them starting to get stale to the training. We back off and go back to the stretch again. Rather than trying to just say, okay, well, you can do it. It's, the horse, it's never just because the horse can't do it. When we encounter most resistances with horses, it's that people are asking horses to do things that they're actually not capable of doing. So you run into a lot of resistance. I hope you can see that everything that I've shown you here, there's been very little resistance to anything that we're doing here. By any of these horses, they all look happy in the work that they're doing at the level that they can do the work. Nor are we having to whip them, a lot, this sort of thing. Yes, we do use whips, and I do ride with spurs, but I don't bloody the horses of my size with them. If I thought there were any chance of that happening, I wouldn't be wearing them. So now we're going to see what happens. This is going to be the first day that we're going to start this horse into a trot with a rider on this back. And I want you to look at, I'm going to show you this a few times, how important it is to be able to be as mentally cool as Damien is. So we're going to start this horse to trot. And just as we started to trot, there was a bang that came from the barn over behind us. And it just sent the horse in what you will soon see. So watch what happens here, and watch how cool Damien keeps his shoulders back. He never tenses up. He keeps his hand wide to keep the slack out of the reins. Watch right here, and explode. So see how he keeps his shoulders back and just keeps his hand wide, stays cool, doesn't lose it, and comes back to the walk. Watch again. So if you don't have that kind of skill, you have no business being on the back of a young horse, because you never know when these kinds of things are going to happen. And many people, once again, you saw how calm this horse was, and all of a sudden it just explodes. So we come back, walk the horse again, back up to what I was doing before. We come back to a walk, and I get the horse just walking calmly again. And then I'm actually going to stop in a moment here after she walks calmly again. I'm going to take him back off the horse here again for a moment. So I don't try to just go right back to where I was, because I probably would end up with the same problem. Or I might. So I'm just going to back up. That tells me this horse may be not quite ready to do that. So I let Damien come back off the horse. And then I just put her back on the lunge line. I take a step back, as I always do. Just take a step back rather than fight. Let the horse stretch back into the contact again. You can see how I got her a little agitated, but it isn't long before she's stretching back, and that's how she's going on the lunge line. That's what I'm looking for. She's beginning to, and this is with no side reins or anything. She's just coming and stretching into the contact. See, she's still looking over there to see what was over there. Right there, that's what I'm looking for. It's just for her to stretch and relax. And remember, there's that thing of when horses stretch, they release endorphins. So and this has been proven scientifically. I'm sure if you look online, you can find the articles about this. Also, why the stretch is so important. Relaxation is the hallmark of good training. When you watch really great trainers, their horses are always relaxed. If you watch these people, for instance, that in dressage where we saw rolkering becoming the big thing, you look at these horses are never relaxed. They're tense all of the time. So after doing a little bit of lunge work, I just come right back to the walk. And that's all we're going to do today. I'm not going to go back to the trot. I don't want her to have a bad experience. Now, fortunately, once again, I had a rider on her who was good enough that understands what to do, which is to do nothing at all. Keep your shoulders back and just stay with the horse and let it relax. Had he responded by throwing his shoulders forward, he would have been long gone off of that horse. So I come back and just let her walk and stretch out. And then in subsequent days to come, we'll go back to the trot work, which you'll be seeing. So again, now that we have our beautiful new stable, have consistency in what we do, we have lots of new horses coming. You're going to see lots of horses developed into the upper levels. And once again, seen many of them work at different levels in terms of where the head and neck position needs to be for each individual one. Now we're going to show you Tommy again. So Karen had worked him in hand. And we come back and see a little more trot work with this one. Now we see him begin to have a little more action. In the hocks, you'll see him begin to stretch into the conduct. But you see how he wants to do there. This horse has got a good back end, though it's quite straight. And if you have a horse that's straight behind, you'll never get good action out of their hocks until they're working over their backs. You see, like right here, his hind legs, when he's up, you see how the hind legs are falling out behind the horse. They're not even coming under the center of the body. So we're hoping you will all gain a great deal by watching these videos that we're going to now be able to do from our new stable here. As I said, we have a lot of new horses coming in over the next couple of months, and we're really looking forward to being in a place here where we can really work our horses consistently. It had become very, very frustrating where we were. The owners that own the barn for the last 3 years have been promising all these fixes to happen, and we would have meetings with them in which they'd say all these things would be fixed, and then nothing would happen. Karen's horse got terribly damaged. They were supposed to fix fences, the stallion wire between the fences, and they said, "Oh, that will all be fixed." And of course, it wasn't. The horse laid down and it's put its leg through the broken stallion wire, and then pulled it back out through the stallion wire and cut all around its coronary band. Just basically ripped up the horse's fetlock joint on one of the hind legs, which we're hoping she may come back from, but it's been a long road to hoe. It's one of those very, as I said, all the prongs from that stallion wire just dug into the horse's legs. Now, amazingly enough, it did it without a lot of damage to tendons and things like that, but it did damage the coronary band, which was about kind of the worst of it. But we're hoping she's going to come back at least be able to be a good horse for somebody at a lower level. Whether she'll ever be Karen's upper level horse the way we had planned, it's hard to say, but we're hoping she'll at least come back and be sound enough to be a horse for somebody. She's a beautiful horse that was a very, very expensive horse. So once again, that's what ultimately, that was the final straw where we were, that we just said, this is enough of this. I mean, it was a beautiful place, as many of you saw from the videos that we made from there, and could have been a lovely, lovely place, but once again, you must have good footing. And I must emphasize once again that the footing has to be soft deep into the ground. You know, when you live in some place like San Diego or California where the ground is just hard as a rock, we sometimes can go for a year and a half without a drop of rain. So there's no moisture in the ground. And that's what happened where we were over there. The year before that, we had a lot of rain and everything became very soft. And then after that rain stopped, everything just hardened into rock. There wasn't enough footing. The waters were not working consistently. It's so important. You see at this rain, you can see some dry spots beginning to happen here and there from the sun, but you see how evenly this water's all over. If you have an arena that doesn't get watered consistently and you go to drag it, what do you think happens? You drag all the soft sand, will drag off where it's dry onto now you'll have deep sand where it was wet, and you'll have ground that's hard as a rock where it doesn't get any water, and softer where it does. So this creates a huge problem, consistent footing. Now, many of you have heard me say, and I say it many times, you know, I grew up riding and training horses out in fields, but even then, we had to be considerate of what was going on at the time. Was it the time of year when the ground is very hard? Is it soft at that time? You know, we tried to find fields without holes and things like that. Now, just know that, you know, if you are working on inconsistent footing, your horse is certainly going to be better if it is over its back, because that will give it some shock absorbing element to it, because the horse will have its own shock absorbers. So you can imagine if you're on bad footing and you don't at least have the horse over the back, how much more damage is going to happen to the horse. But a ring should be built like this one. As you can see there where the barn is sticking up, this ring is actually elevated about 6 feet above the barn, and that's all compacted, different levels of compaction as it goes up to the top. And you can even feel that when you walk across the ground. You feel like you could just take off running on this and you could run for a long time. It has give to it even when you walk on it. So as I said, it became very, very frustrating to us over the last couple of years, and we had to just finally, after Karen's horse became so injured, we had to back up and just start slowly walking our horses and doing these things. They almost all became footsore um, over this last year, and we had to make some shoeing changes and totally change our, the amount of work we could do, because we couldn't do the amount of work that we were doing with our horses. So of course we lost top line, and when we do that, we know we have to take a step back, like you see me doing. This is the first week in our new stable with all of these horses, and some coming here for the first time. So we're going back to the beginning with them, and we'll build it up slowly. But you see, this has only been 1 week. So I'm showing you here in this video 1 week of work with our horses. So you can see they all came in, rather strung out, if you will, and a bit on their forehands, because we haven't been able to work them like we have been able to work them before. So you can see with this one, typical young horse here, that he wants to react instead of getting over his back. Something goes by and he wants to spook. And you can still see, but you can see how he's beginning to have a little more hock movement, and the front end is beginning to become a little lighter here. And you can see him beginning to experiment with finding that stretch down. So I realize from all the traveling that I've been doing around the world is that, sometimes, many of you I only see once a year, and in between I have no idea what's going on unless you send in videos. Now, many of the people have kept on really consistent work, but many people have also discovered, interesting problems, like the fact that like the consistent footing. If you don't have good footing, and once you get these horses up into maximum gaits and you really start to get them swinging over the back, if you're in an unlevel ring, once again, go out yourself and run full bore on a flat, soft surface, and then go out and run through a trail through a field and see how different it is. You can't run the same level without falling on your face. So once we get these horses really opening their strides, it's so important that they be on consistent footing. And once again, the bigger the horses, that was the problem. Like Perhaps didn't have a lot of problem at the old stable because she's a small horse. The bigger the horses are, of course, the more concussion they have on their feet. So the bigger, more active horses you have, the more damage is going to be done to them, or the more difficult it's going to be to ride them on hard or uneven surfaces. Or even worse, hard and uneven surfaces. But if we really want to work horses in full open gaits, we've got to be on good, consistent tracks. I mean, you notice at the Olympics, they don't run the speed races, out in the field. They run them on tracks, and if you were ever to walk on one of those tracks, you'd feel how cushy they are. So even a human being, the damage that it does, to not do this in the correct way, that is just like a runner. If you go out and run with your legs straight, you're going to be sore the next day. Same true of horses. So see him beginning to get the neck out, but we see a little more hock movement here like that. Now the hock, we see the shoulder begin to swing a little better. Like that, now we begin to see something that looks like what we're looking for. He gets more relaxed, and we start to see a little push through the hock a little bit. The front end begins to lighten up a little bit. So after 3 or 4 days here, he's well on his way to beginning to get working over his back. Now the beauty of this horse, other than being a little overflexed in his neck, and he's not terribly, he's not one of these ones that will just crank his neck over to his chest, but he definitely feels like he had been draw-reined. And we do see people occasionally saying, oh, well, people are telling me to put draw reins on my horse that I've been stretching to get them up. That's not how you get a horse up. Remember, it's so important that you all learn to use your legs correctly and your balance. If you have not gotten to the point where you can be balanced above the horse without falling forward, or you're not riding in a forward type of seat where you're leaning forward all the time, you're never going to get these horses to balance up underneath you. That's why I often mention, if you look at the German riding books about stretching, they say you should lean forward. And that's great. You can lean forward if you are in a jumping length stirrup. But if you lean forward and you're in dressage length stirrups where your legs are long, you can't balance down through your lower leg. That's why you saw me in these earlier tapes on some of these horses shortening my stirrups, because I wanted to be able to get up in a 2-point position in the canter on them and be able to stay off their backs. You can't do that with a super long stirrup. So it's very important that we be able to do that. So if your riding is not to that point, or you're still leaning forward while you're riding, your horses are never going to come off of the forehand, even if you're stretching them, as we see. When we see all these Western riders that go with the nose on the ground, now these horses are usually, they're not stretched because they've activated their back. Usually they use these stretching things where they have things that go over the pole that pull the horse's head down and things like this. Or even some of this stuff, as you heard me talk about clicker training. Yes, you can teach a horse on cue to put its neck down, but that doesn't mean that it's moving through the back. Now, if it helps a little bit in the beginning, that might help you. But if you don't get the neck to go down because of the action of the hind legs pushing up through the back and pushing the withers up and the neck forward, then the horse will be on its forehand forever. And of course, this is what's, adds argument to the people who would say that, oh, what we're doing here is just putting horses on the forehand. But of course, horses in the beginning are on the forehand. You can't pull a horse off of its forehand. You can shorten its gaits and trot around the arena. And if you have one of these fantastic movers that has giant movers, you can do that. And it looks like something who's just like a saddlebred does. But a saddlebred has no thrust through its back at all. It always has, feet on the ground. If it's in the trot, 2 feet are always on the ground. There's no thrust. There's no moment of suspension. It's that moment of suspension that we want to ride. And of course, that tells us that moment of suspension means that we have some suppleness in the horse. So while he's still not quite all the way there yet, what Karen is going to do here with this is let Damien, she's working with him with lunging a little bit, so he's going to lunge this horse a little bit as she works with him. So coming back to a walk, where once again, we always come back to where we can do it correctly. And we see how it gets a pretty nice stretch in the walk there. It's a little more active, not where we want it to be yet. There, the walk gets quite good there. You can see how every time he's a little distracted. Watch every time the head comes up, how this back end stops moving. So this is always the key, is watching the back end. What's the back end doing? What the front end is doing can help. In other words, if the horse is in a stretch, we might have the horse, it might be working over its back, but it might not be also. So learning to recognize that moment when the horse is working over its back, and conversely, when we bring them up, whether we keep that same activity as we saw in some of the earlier videos where Barb was able to bring the horse up and the balance didn't change. And in fact, when she brought him up, we saw the front end elevate a little bit. So that told us that the horse is working over its back. If not, and she'd taken contact, the horse would just roll over the bridle, which is what happens when horses aren't over their back. So if you're working with your horses in this level, and that starts to happen, you start to curl over your reins, then you know you need to let the horse back out again, because once again, you can try to give the horse a little more leg and give it a little touch underneath and see if it comes up. But if it doesn't, you can't do anything but go back to the stretch. Otherwise, you see what we see so many people doing, where all of a sudden they're stopping and they're whipping the horse, or they're reining them back violently, trying to pull the horse back onto its hindquarters. And that's one of the biggest misnomers, ever, is this idea that you can possibly pull a horse, into a correct frame. It just doesn't work that way, because when you pull them into a shortened frame, it might feel like something to someone who doesn't know, but if you feel like you're sitting in a hole, if you don't feel the back lifting you and carrying you, or you've never learned what that feels like, you've really got to examine your own riding and ask yourself, what am I really feeling here? What's really happening? Is the horse just running? You can get them down and you can get them running. That's why I decided to show you a few clips here, for instance, where I broke it down for you so you could see the moment that the horse started to lift up a little more. That once again, it was not only in a stretch, but it was lifting up. Those are the moments that we have to learn to recognize if we're going to learn the difference and how correct riding actually works. And that's, of course, why this system of riding, once again, I've given you many books to read, like Dressage Formula, and shown you many of the top riders in the world. Like we just show you the video that we just saw, not video, but the picture that we just posted of one of the world's greatest jumper riders, who was one of the most consistent jumper riders all through the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and came up along with those same people like Michael Matz and the greatest riders that we had here in the United States, who were all sort of part of that Bert Denemethy group after World War II, that were all trained by the great Hungarian trainer Bert Denemethy, who was the one who really put the foundation for all of our greatest riders, like Bill Steinkraus. These kind of people all were able to work with him. Unfortunately, not a lot of people got that education, and there were some who got the education, who came out of that, and who took it, who never really understood it. Who are big-time trainers today because they were part of that same group. But if you go and you look at how their horses were trained compared to how the greatest riders here, like Michael Matz, go back and watch him. Some of the greats that came out of that, Robert Ridlin. Some of the great riders that all came out of that same group, Bill Steinkraus and all that group that were part of that group after, in the 50s, that got that great training when horses and riding started to come back. And once again, many of the riders that we lost, or rather say we lost them after World War II. My own father was a trainer before World War II, had a big stable. And when they came back from World War II, they came to realize, as people in Europe all did, the horses were all gone. And this is why riding became so confusing for people, is that we lost most of the great trainers after World War II. And even many of them who were great trainers, like Nuno Oliveira and von Neindorf in Germany, who were the two probably greatest riders, who were using a system that was quite similar, doing everything we do. That's why I tried to encourage you all to read Dressage Formula by Eric Herbermann. Eric Herbermann was von Neindorf's student for many years and wrote down his system, if you will. And you'll find all those similarities. Even people like the great rider Rodney Jenkins. If you ever get a chance to see his video, he's a Southern boy, grew up in North Carolina. And in the middle of this video, and unfortunately he never explains it, he says he's sitting there talking about horses that he likes and what he likes and whatever. And he says out of the blue, I really like me a horse that gets its back up underneath me. That's what I like. But he never explains to people what that actually means. But there's no doubt he was getting his horses' backs up underneath him, or he would not have been, he was the most consistent Grand Prix rider that we had in the world for many, many years, and was a phenomenal rider. But once again, he made that comment without clarifying what he actually meant by that comment. So look how this horse is beginning to stretch. Now the walk has gotten much better. I've tried to use this term. I'm letting you see the whole workout with this horse today, so I can give you some final thoughts on it all. There he starts to walk and swing much more actively. So beginning to understand the history of dressage, how we evolved to what we evolved to now. We saw a big growth in dressage. I've been doing this pretty much as long as dressage has been in America. So I've been through all the stages of it. Fortunately, I had a father who taught me to ride just the way I ride now when I was a child. And then when I went to college and started riding for professional trainers, was the only time I'd experienced and started experiencing what other people were doing other than what my father had told me, which basically was everything that I'm telling you guys for the most part. Though he was not, it took me years to begin to explain it to people, because while my father talked about these things, we did these things, but he never said why. He would say, this is just what you do, I mean, I was just taught, you stretch a horse. I was taught how to do this, and this is what you do. You go out, especially when you're out going cross country. The first thing he told me was, horses have to have their heads down to see where they're going, and we always hacked horses out, in a big long stretch so they could see where they were going. And but he never broke it down for me mechanically, if you will. It was just, this is what you do, kid, if you will. And, that's what gave me the good foundation that I got, that when I started my search after riding with professional trainers in America, and I pretty much rode with anybody that there was you can name over the years, when I was young, in my search to try to figure out what exactly this was. I was always a big reader of the books that were available to me from the time I was a child, and read and pored over every possible book I could find for 20 years, trying to get information and beginning to evaluate and read about all the different people's different theories. One of the first books that I ever read, which many of you may know about, was Professor Berry's training books. Professor Berry actually ordered them out of the back of a comic book. Professor Berry was an 19th century trainer who was very famous. He was with the circus, and they would always go around. The circus would do things like, bring us the worst horse in town, and he would train it in front of the whole crowd. And he wrote a 37-volume book that covered every type of riding there was in the world. It literally was a book about dressage, which they called high school riding, which was the first book I ever read about high school riding, or dressage, so to speak, and about Western riding, reining, trick horses. And I learned a lot from those books. They're very interesting to read. You can actually find them on eBay. People sell them. Each book is like a little 50-page pamphlet or something that on each type of riding, even saddlebreds, Tennessee walkers, you name it. He covered the entire gamut. And it was just very interesting as I got those books when I was like 8 or 9 years old at the oldest, and read through them all and learned how to train my horses to do trick horses and these kind of things. And I learned a great deal, and then I went on studying to try to find out, as there weren't a lot of books, there weren't videos available the way there are today, and many of the great trainers never put those videos out there. So you can see, backing up to what's happening here, that Karen is having a little bit of difficulty with this one. And watch how she handles it, just staying behind him. But he was trying to pull out too much is what was happening there. So she gets him stretching back into the stretch, get him back ahead of her leg again, and he comes back into the stretch. So once again, finding about the system and then taking the time to train lots and lots of horses to find out what works and what doesn't work, And I was able to do that and have always been quite successful at this. I'm a USDF silver medalist. I'm a qualified rider at Prix St. George. I've won Horse of the Year awards with my horse in dressage at every level except Grand Prix. And I trained many event horses, many top event riders in California. I trained about 5 state champions or West Coast champions. I worked with one of the national junior champions. I've ridden myself through the highest level of eventing. I've ridden open jumpers back when open jumpers was what we had. I showed and trained lots of hunters, polo horses, race horses. So I've tried to apply this work, and that's been the biggest thing that I have, that I came to the conclusion that there wasn't that much difference. When I studied the really great riders, if you study the great polo riders, they have their horses over their backs. In fact, it was a polo trainer who I'm going to try to do a video about pretty soon, who I was actually giving a dressage clinic somewhere, and I saw, and they have a polo club there, and I saw this guy riding, and I was just blown away. He had no standing martingale. He rode his horses only in a snaffle. Well, it turns out he was a 9-goal player who had actually been the chef d'equipe, so to speak, for General Carpentry, who wrote that great cavalry manual, and he's the one who actually trained all of his horses, and he was an amazing man, flying changes every stride on his polo ponies. So you have to look beyond. Just because someone calls it dressage, I discovered that there were a lot of people doing a lot of things that didn't call it dressage, that were doing something closer to what I now consider to be dressage than some of the people that were calling themselves dressage. It was very difficult in the beginning. A lot of trainers were brought over here from Europe. And what I came to discover is most of the ones who moved to America came here because they couldn't get arrested in Europe, if you will. So they came here, and once again, people thought because they had a European accent that they knew what they were doing. But we found that that was not so true. So I spent a lifetime traveling the world. I've studied at Nuno's. I've studied at the Spanish Riding School. I've studied at the Cadre Noir in France. I've studied at Mafra in Portugal. So I traveled all over the world. I went to the Freddie Knee Circus to see what he was doing with his horses, which was quite amazing. As Nuno used to say, the best piaffe I ever saw was an elephant that was trained by Freddie Knee at the Knee Circus in Switzerland. So, I went all over the world to try to see what people were doing and study the horses and study, what had become of them, if you will, how long they lasted. So you see our little horse, perhaps she's 21. You've seen some of our other horses like Contigo, who stayed at the old stable, and he's 24 years old now and still going fantastically with his owner, and I'm sure he'll go on for many more years. At Nuno's, he had horses that were school horses. They were all pretty amazing in that they could all do some pretty amazing things. But some of them were in their 30s, so you can see that horses, this idea that horses are going lame at 7 or 8 years old, there's something really wrong with. But once again, it's that thing of, if you have these horses, we breed these horses with so much power today, if they don't get the correct training, they're going to go lame, because if they have so much power in their bodies, if that power isn't being directed correctly, it's like a weightlifter. You might be the strongest man in the world, and you go to a lift one day and you crack your back in the wrong direction and you pull your whole back out. Well, the same thing is true of horses. If they're working and we're trying to get these maximum gaits, maximum jumps out of them, what do you think is going to happen? Their legs are going to be damaged in the process. That's why, this whole idea of how the body functions. I don't like to use the word biomechanics. It's the correct word, but the problem is we have a lot of charlatans using the word biomechanics right now as kind of their whole catchword, like this is something special. Biomechanics just means a physical body in movement and how its posture affects that movement. That's all that it means. It's not, it's not any mysterious thing. So I kind of stay away from that, because I see a lot of people who say that what they're doing is biomechanically correct, and yet then I see them actually work their horses, and that's not what's happening at all. But they're saying biomechanics all the time, and yet you look at their horses and they're sitting in a hole in a sway-backed horse. Well, no sway-backed horse is biomechanically correct. However, this one is starting to be much more biomechanically correct here, as we see him now beginning to stretch out. Now look how different this all is. Now look at the hind legs are coming underneath the body. He's beginning to step into the track of the front legs. This is what we're looking for. So I've let you watch all the steps along the way. And of course, with the other horses that I've shown you, I'm trying to give you a big overview so that you guys can begin to see. I'm trying to break it down so you can see some of those moments that we saw when I broke it down, to where you could see the same moments over and over again. So you're recognizing that moment that the horse gets over its back. And that moment is always a moment to reward at the very beginning. Now, of course, as time goes on, when they're rewarded for doing something, and when we stop at this moment and get off, it's always better the next day. I'm always trying to stop at the correct moment. In other words, at the moment that I get the optimal movement out of the horse, I get the optimal cooperation out of the horse, or optimal understanding out of the horse. That's the moment that I'm going to stop, and I don't care if I'm 5 minutes into the ride. If a horse gets something that I've been a sticking point on for a long time, that's exactly where I'm going to stop. I do not train by time, other than to say that I try to never go over time. It would be rare for me to work a horse for over an hour, and most of my workouts are somewhere in the range of 30 minutes to 45 minutes, 50 minutes. That's about it. And that includes warm up, stretch down, stretch down. But of course, in the beginning, it's also important when they first learn something. It'd be nice to, I want to go for a hack now. But if horses really learn something new, you really want to get off and just be done, because that's what they really understand. If you worked on some difficult point and now you're going to go take them on a trail ride for an hour, they're not going to understand that they're going to miss the point of that moment that you got to. So I'm always trying to stop at that optimal moment of understanding for the horse, like Karen is doing here for this one. He got nicely over the back. This was the first day we saw him actually stretch in the trot and start to come into the contact correctly. And so we're done. This is Will Favor from Art to Ride with my lovely wife Karen, our associate trainer Damien. Thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited about our new stable and being able to bring in a lot more horses than we were able to before, because we simply didn't have room. And of course, having the footing to work them all correctly so that we can begin to show you all how to move on to the next step using this system. Thank you all very much for watching, and thank you all for being so appreciative and what's the word I'm looking for? Supportive of what we do. Thank you all very much. This is Will Favor from Art to Ride. See you soon.